Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Nancy hated holidays and weekends. All normal people couldn't wait for Friday because it was followed by the most pleasant days of the week. For Nancy, the upcoming weekend always had a negative connotation, and what could be joyful in grueling housework while ruling with family scandals. This morning, she and her husband had already kissed. Barely Nancy thought of her friar. As he was born on the sofa was, opening one eye. Spouse grumbled, "What are you beating like a mouse here? You're doing everything on purpose to poison my day off." The man pushed away the pillow he had been hugging before and took a deep exhale. Nancy rolled her eyes, saying she had someone to blame. She wrinkled her nose and stepped farther away. "Ben, have you ever betrayed your entire family?" The man smirked. "No remedy will take you, and you're not talking my teeth. I'm having a hard time, and you're going back and forth. I can't just tiptoe around. I've got a lot to do. If I wait for you to rush around, I'll never get anything done." This dialogue put a lot of stress on Ben. He couldn't stand it when his wife outweighed him. And today, her intransigence especially grated on the man's nerves. With a heavy sigh, the head of the family Duden took the position of a thinker, and since his head did not want to hold independently, had to prop it up with his hands. Only after gaining a stable position, he honored his wife with a long, unkind look. "You can't keep up because your hands are in the wrong place. You walk like a somnambulist, stumbling at every step. You're a walking disaster, not a woman." Nancy with feeling threw the rag that was wiping the dust with water. She did it with such force that the spray reached the sofa, then abruptly jumped out of the image of a thinker. His whole body now expressed indignation, and his right hand, like that of the leader of the world proletariat, extended from strictly forward. Only the legendary cap was missing for the completeness of the picture. The man's hangover speech was also suffering from slurred speech. Out of all his poor vocabulary, what came to his mind were these crooked hands, not seeing that I felt bad. Nancy was satisfied with the effect of her graceful revenge. She mockingly advised to drink less, then it would be good. "And you're wrong about Krivorishko. In this regard, you have no equal. For 3 months she asked me to change the socket in the corridor." Ben shook his head. "I did everything. What are the complaints? You come and find out. Used to be sparks flying. Now it's electrocuted. They say that craftsmen like you, Ben, are golden hands. But please don't insult me in my own home." The man's voice trailed off, and his eyes sought to go out of their orbits. The torment of a legitimate husband gave Nancy satisfaction after the man had been reduced to an extreme degree of helplessness. The woman clutched noisily at the rag and began rubbing the furniture with fanatical exasperation. Ben watched his spouse's actions for a few seconds, then resolutely cocked his head. But from this ill-considered action, red and purple circles swam in front of his eyes. The side effect of a cheerful Friday was due to the fact that the day before the man drastically overdid it and was now unable to hold an upright position. For more than a minute his large body spontaneously collapsed on the sofa. And there were tears in his voice. "Nancy, why are you being so cruel to me? It's bad enough without your lectures. And you're adding to the pain. You're a woman, so you should be merciful." Nancy grinned wryly. "Mercy doesn't extend to the likes of you, Ben. I'd rather pity a benign cat on the street because he does not drink vodka," and all that Burns men belittlingly looked at his wife Nancy. "All right, let the good cat be dearer to you than your own husband." Well, there was no water to take a sip of. This call broke against the wall of incomprehension. The woman looked at the sufferer in male form and said with disdain, "Legs are there. Go to the kitchen and serve yourself." Ben grabbed the left side of his chest and faked a heart attack. But the woman only grinned. "Ben, it's time for you to change your cardiac repertoire, not jamming vodka in the garage with Akis of various stripes. They're on a non-alcoholic regimen." Nancy gathered up her cleaning supplies and proudly walked past her husband. She was already behind the door, but apparently something clicked in her soul, and she called out to her daughter Helen, Stop dying. Father is suffering. Bring him some water. God forbid. He's going to drop his hooves. We don't have money for a funeral." From somewhere in the back of the apartment came a grumbling sound. "You can't do this without me. I'm entitled to a decent night's sleep once a week." The daughter walked barefoot, fell into the kitchen, and cast a glance in her mother's direction. But the latter did not respond to her indignation. Helen filled a glass with water and headed for the sofa on which her father was suffering on drinking Ben in one gulp, and left the vessel. "Thank you, daughter. I have you as a true friend and comrade. And our mom, she's as cold as a queen from a fairy tale." Nancy couldn't stand it. She appeared on the living room doorstep, but now with a rolling pin. Really, this instrument in her hands of the enraged woman looked more like a bat. "I see you've been sneaking around behind my back. Well, what I want to tell you is this. There are no lackeys here, and I don't have to fulfill your wishes. You two have been wandering around till morning, and then you make some kind of claim on me." Helen realized her mother was in a bad mood today, so she rushed over to her and kissed her. "Mommy, don't be offended. It's just a figure of speech. You're the most beautiful, the warmest." "True," Daddy Ben mooed enthusiastically and threw out his hand in greeting. Mouth front. Not even the toughest woman could resist such a display of affection. She considered herself weak. She looked down at her husband and daughter with revelry. "Get yourselves cleaned up, and we'll rush you, so you both overslept tomorrow. And it's a long way from lunch." Helen gave another kiss to her daughterly love. "Mom, we'll call this meal Saturday lunch." Women affectionately slapped their daughter's soft spot. "Go get dressed and hide. You've got a nightmare on your head. Mom, you don't understand anything about modern fashion. It's the latest fashions. Half the city is wearing these things." Helen kissed her father and ran to her room. Ben struggled to get up from the sofa and wandered into the bathroom. "I have to take a shower. I've got you too stormy today." Soon there was a steady sound of water, and Nancy calmed down a little. She tried to turn her attention to her current problems, but suddenly her husband's cheerful voice came from the bathroom. "Nancy forgot to tell you that Molly is here. I met her yesterday, and she asked if you could come by. As soon as she's free. She's not much of a lady. She could have come herself. The crown won't fall off her head. Do as you please. My business is small." I was asked. I passed on the information. In just 10 minutes, Ben had undergone a dramatic transformation. A healthy blush burned on his cheeks. There was no more hangover cloudiness in his eyes. Nancy held her gaze on her husband and said with satisfaction, "Well, now it's different. You look like a human being now." The man threw a wet towel into the bathroom and tried to hug his wife, but she wrinkled her nose. "Ben, do you smell so bad you can snack?" Apparently, he expected a completely different reaction and said with irritation, "You cannot please you. Then you do not like this, then the other. You don't break your nose. Like a girl before her first wedding night." Ben, thinking what you say, would be ashamed of his daughter. Helen informed in a cheerful voice, "Mom, don't worry. I am aware of the relationship between members of the opposite sexes. You must have forgotten that your daughter is in medical school." While arguing, the mother and father did not notice that their heiress appeared in the kitchen. Helen immediately rushed to the table and started grabbing everything off the plates. "Man, I'm so hungry. I have a beastly appetite." Nancy looked fondly at her daughter. "Sit down at the table and eat. What's with all the hand-grabbing?" Helen managed to chew and at the same time say, "Mommy, it tastes better that way. If you do not know, I can inform you that the tradition of eating without using cutlery is developed in many countries. So don't swear at your daughter. Don't waste your precious nerves. No nerves will be enough with you. Dad's been drinking a lot. And you were out at night." The smile fell off the girl's face. "Mommy, did you choose the wrong verb? I didn't go out with girls. Remember, I warned you that Lara's wedding is next week, so we got together yesterday for, like, a bachelorette party." The woman waved her hand nonchalantly. "A bachelorette party is held on the eve of the wedding, not the week before." Helen looked condescendingly at her mother, and we're having a rehearsal. Nancy repeated the dismissive gestures and said in the same tone, "What a life. Everyone's rehearsing hairstyles, bachelorette, and bachelor parties. What's the use? It doesn't. Family life doesn't depend on those little things. It can't be rehearsed." The daughter said nothing to her mother. She looked expressively at her father, as if expecting him to support her. Ben had managed his lunch and was now drinking tea. Although the wedding topic was far from his interest, he couldn't refuse his daughter's support, making a smart expression on his face. The man remarked to his mother, "You're not on a roll today. You're picking on me. Now you're talking about the wedding. I don't care how people get married. The wedding should be fun. Who would doubt it? You're all about fun. I don't care about other people either, unless it's about my family. Ben, instead of affecting your daughter, you're all over everything." "Nancy, Helen is already a full-fledged citizen. You forgot that she is already 19, and she can go out till morning and even get married without your permission, has every right to." The woman's indignation took her breath away. "Ben, do you even think about what you're talking about? What marriage? Look at her. She's just a kid. Honey, think of yourself at that age. By the way, if memory serves, you were 19 when we got married." The man made dancing pod with his feet and smirked ambiguously, expecting a similar reaction from his wife. But Nancy cast a glance in his direction. "That was the biggest mistake of my life. If I hadn't flown headlong into marriage, I would have studied at the Institute, gotten a good profession, and my life would have turned out very differently." This confession made an unpleasant impression on Ben. His lips merged into a single thread. His cheekbones set. "And if I understand you correctly, you've regretted being my wife all these 20 years. Suddenly, he was pouring out a barrage of sludge on me. But it's better to know the truth late than to stay in ignorance for years." Nancy tried to say something in her defense, but the man beat her to it. "Nancy, can you still make it right? Find a decent life partner. If I don't suit you." Ben pushed his plate away from him and got up from the table. A minute later, the apartment door slammed and Helen rushed into the hallway. "Daddy, wait," but the head of the family had already left the house, which he had always felt warm and cozy, only barely caught, and the smell of male perfume hovered in the cramped room. The daughter looked reproachfully at her mother. "I don't understand why you arranged all this. And then you have to think before you say something. Don't you realize you've hurt Daddy?" Nancy quietly asked me what I'd done to him. The daughter was on the verge of a breakdown. "With your confession, sometimes it's better to be quiet than to speak. And then, if you hadn't married Daddy, then I wouldn't have been born. So I'm your biggest mistake too." Ducking her head with two neat ponytails, Helen headed for the exit, but halfway there she turned around. "Aunt Molly's here. She asked you to stop by. She has some kind of emergency message for you." The door slammed again, and Nancy was left alone with her unhappy thoughts. She was already regretting having said so many nasty things to the people closest to her. But the germ of doubt that had been brewing in her heart for a long time now, especially strongly lately, began to bother her. So when her daughter informed her of her girlfriend's upcoming wedding, this unpleasant feeling immediately reminded herself. The brothers were born and raised in a village lost among the forests. But like most young people of the post-war era, they were eager to take part in something important to the country and take. The elder James, after serving in the army, set out to conquer the North. He dreamed of sailing the sea, but after 2 campaigns he realized that he would not make a navigator. The first failure did not deprive the enthusiast of faith in his abilities, and James got a job at a mining enrichment plant. In this field he found himself and wrote optimistic letters to his relatives. In one of them he reported, "In another month I will get a separate apartment and marry a wonderful girl. Lissa also works at the mill, taught chips. I hope she will fit into our friendly family." A little later James wrote that he and his young wife celebrated a noisy housewarming party, and they were given a 2-chamber refrigerator from work. At that time, such an appliance was the dream of all Soviet housewives, so the brother's mother was proud of her eldest son's achievements and read his letters aloud in the store. Rural women oohed and awed. "I envy you. No luck. What a good son. And he sends them money every month." Envy bit the younger brother's soul too. Alex also dreamed of success and getting rich. However, his plans did not include moving too far away from his native land, and he found an interesting occupation in the regional center. After studying at a vocational technical school, Alex got a job in a construction organization. He started out as a simple laborer. Then he entered the institute by correspondence and became a site foreman. In his personal life, too, everything developed in an increasing way. Alex married a modest girl, Kate, and a year later Nancy appeared in the family. The first childhood memories of his youth are connected with his father. Alex took his little daughter to the construction site and showed her from a bird's eye view of the mountains. Watch, daughter, and memorize how cities grow. Nancy was breathless at the panorama below, but she wasn't scared at all because Daddy was there. She was very proud of her father. And first in kindergarten and then at school, she told her peers, "My daddy has the most important profession in the world. When I grow up too, how will he build cities?" Parents condescended to the plans of the little daughter, but so far did not interfere with them. Only when the girl became older, her father began to make attempts to redirect her to the wall around so many other very interesting activities. "You're a girl. You'd better choose a quieter profession. Could you be like Mom and become a nurse? It's a very respectable profession. You'll always be clean, warm, and in a white coat." Hearing such speeches of her husband, Kate was indignant. "Alex, why advise your child on something you have no idea about? Medicine is only at first glance an angelic field, but in reality, there's suffering and death every day. So don't get ahead of yourself. The time will come, and Nancy will choose a career of her own. Your brother and his wife are very well settled in life, rolling around like cheese in butter. They've got a big apartment and a car. They can afford things that others dare not dream of." Nancy listened to her parents' arguments and memorized. She knew about the existence of her relatives, but she had seen them only once. The girl was in 3rd grade when Uncle James, along with his wife and young daughter, came to visit them for 2 days. Dad's brother was very funny and joked a lot. Life is like a weather forecast. Everything comes true exactly, but at a different time. In general, Uncle James had a saying for every occasion. I remembered only one saying from a whole arsenal for all my life. If we imagine that an ordinary gymnasium is a school of wizards, then all students can be divided into 3 categories: wizards, magicians, and sorcerers. The girl laughed at this caustic definition because in their class there were only solid oaks, sorcerers. She decided to share her findings with Molly, Uncle Sergei's daughter, even though her cousin was 2 years younger than Nancy. She knew more than she could ever dream of. Molly couldn't sit in one place for a minute, and she was always bugging Nancy. "What are we going to do with you and me stuck at home? Let's go for a walk. You probably have friends." Nancy was eager to say there were friends in the yard and at school. "But your mom's looking at us like that." Don't mind her. She always looks that way because she doesn't trust anyone. Indeed, Aunt Lisa was the complete opposite of her husband. She was silent all the time and sighed unhappily when, after much persuasion, Nancy decided to take her cousin out in public. The aunt had rudely lashed out, not at her daughter, but at Nancy. "If you have an itch in one place, go for a walk, and Molly has nothing to do in the yard." Nancy cried with resentment. Alex stood up for his daughter, Lisa. "What's the matter? What do you run into?" "On the wall. You know, in our family, it is not customary to yell at children, and even more so to humiliate them." Aunt Lisa gave a squeamish wince. "I've already noticed that it's chaos around here. Everyone does what they want to do. In our family, the rules are a little different." The aunt had already prepared to share her experience of proper family life, but her husband judged her fervor, trying to restrain himself. James reprimanded his wife Lisa. "You must have forgotten that we are guests. It means that you shouldn't go into someone else's monastery with your own rules." Molly's mother blushed with indignation and began to prove her husband right with the stubbornness of a blind man. "What did I say that was so special?" "Nothing. I'm just trying to protect our daughter." Uncle James threw both hands up as if he were going to throw a ball into the net. "Lisa, how many times do I have to tell you that a child is supposed to socialize with other children? He's supposed to be spoiled and do impertinent things." To his distress, Alex decided to support his older brother. "Really, Lisa, you have nothing to be afraid of. In our house live decent people, and the girls are not threatened in the yard." The aunt, with the same squeamish expression on her face, objected to the owner of the house. "I saw these decent people yesterday. Some of them are playing dominoes, and others are in the bushes thinking for two. I can imagine what kind of kids grow up with parents like that. Such a campaign is definitely not suitable for our daughter." At the end of this tirade, Lisa grabbed Molly by the hand and dragged her daughter into the room that the owners had allocated to the relatives. Already from there, the woman shouted in her own voice to James, "We're going home tomorrow." James felt uncomfortable with his wife's behavior. He grinned wryly and said to his brother, "Yes, Alex, real life is different from a fairy tale in that everything happens in it. On the contrary, you marry a beautiful princess who, after a year or even earlier, turns into a wart and already a toad or a viper." The next morning, the guests left for home in a hurry. Nancy did not even have time to say goodbye to her cousin. Since then, she has disliked her aunt with all her soul and once confessed to her parents. Molly is good, and Uncle James is good too. Aunt Lisa is a very bad person. If she comes to visit us again, I won't let her in the apartment. Alex tried to change the 10-year-old's mind. "Nancy, you can't judge a person by one act." Aunt Lisa was just in a bad mood and said something stupid. "Indeed, she is kinder. Aunts don't say such mean words." The wall was destined to keep its promise because Uncle James and his family did not come for a long time. The girl began already to forget about the offense against her aunt. One day at dinner, her father said sadly. James called, said that he was diagnosed with a serious illness, and he no longer works at the mill. Kate expertly said, "Unfortunately, many people pay for a comfortable life with their health. After all, nobody pays big money for nothing." Nancy realized that this conversation was not for children's ears. She kept silent and memorized everything her parents said. A few days later, the girl learned from her father that Uncle James and his family were preparing to move. Doctors said that in the north for his brother is unsuitable climate. In short, they are preparing to move. The daughter was burning with curiosity. She involuntarily burst out a question, "Daddy, and they will live with us again?" "No, Uncle James and Aunt Lisa are buying an apartment in our town. They have already found the right one." This news made Nancy happy. "Oh, that's great. So Molly's gonna live here now too, and we're gonna see her." "Of course you will. Your siblings should keep in touch." But Lisa wasn't in the mood for sibling bonding. Immediately after moving in, she smiled wryly and remarked that we were very lucky to have the apartment. James wanted to be close to his brother. "I think it's best for relatives to keep their distance in every sense." Kate responded to that hint with Lisa, "Don't worry about it. Alex and I are not in the habit of imposing our society on others. But our house is always open to guests, so you can come to us at any time, even at night." Lisa only shook her lips and flashed her eyes angrily. Because Nancy's mom had caught her off guard with her offer, despite her wife's prejudice against her brother's family. James was seeing Alex on a regular basis. They visited the old people in the village together and involved their daughters in these events. Lisa tried her best to prevent such meetings. Sometimes she even went to provocations, but it is known that any obstacle only hardens the character and friendship between the sisters, despite the tricks of Molly and Mother, only became stronger. The only thing that united both families was the worry for the older brother. The change of climate did not improve Sergei Evseevich's health. He slowly faded away before the eyes of his relatives. Kate, through familiar doctors, tried to arrange for her husband's brother specialist consultations in famous clinics. But even the most famous luminaries of medicine spread their hands. Unfortunately, the process is very neglected, and it is almost impossible to fix anything. James died when he was only 47 years old. Molly's father's death was the biggest tragedy of her life. For Nancy, it was also the first serious loss, because she loved her kind and cheerful uncle, who had his own quips for every occasion. It was the short and very apt sayings that she remembered most. Trying to calm the crying Molly, she repeated time after time, life as a holiday. And on holidays you can't work. Such days are supposed to be fun. The cousin was surprised. Nancy, what do you want to say to yourself? I just remembered your dad's favorite expression about life and holidays. I think he would be telling you, Molly, right now to stop crying. Molly looked at Nancy in disbelief. Do you think he would say that? I'm sure he would. You might even think he's giving you that order through me. You know, my mom says that everyone who dies goes up into the sky and watches their loved ones from there. Molly froze with her mouth open. She must have been in a state of prostration for a minute. Then she jumped out into the street. There she stared up at the starry sky for a long time. Nancy realized that her younger sister believed in this mystical story about the souls of the dead. The older sister's hunch was confirmed. A few days later, Molly showed up at their house on a Sunday afternoon early in the morning. The girl was excited, her eyes burning when she and Nancy were alone. She mumbled mysteriously, "You were right. They all live in the sky." Nancy darted her eyes out in bewilderment. "Who are they?" Molly sighed eloquently. "Who? The ones who died. You were the one who told me. Have you forgotten?" Nancy remembered a recent conversation about this. How you found out it was Nancy became a little creepy because her sister's eyes were so fierce. Molly moved closer to her sister and whispered, "I had a dream about Daddy today. But it wasn't like a dream, it was real. Daddy told me that where he is now is very nice." Nancy asked, "I hope you didn't tell your mom about your vision." "What are you talking about? She's gonna drag me straight to counseling if I tell her something like that. Let it be our little secret." We did. Molly looked at Nancy like she'd discovered the secret to eternal life, or something like that. Childish maximalism it is. Nancy couldn't deny her sister such a small thing. The common grief brought the girls and Molly even closer together, and she paid less attention to her mother's eternal nagging. By the time of graduation from high school, she and her parents had practically nothing to do with each other. Molly lived her own active life and made very bold plans for the future. She shared them only with her cousin. The native mother was in complete ignorance. After the death of her husband, Lisa completely withdrew into herself and even business. Her only daughter was of little interest to her, not to mention the events that were unfolding across the country at that time. The apartment was unaccustomedly quiet, and only the clock flowed measuredly on the wall. Nancy ate, dwelling on the unpleasant feeling of discomfort. Now she regretted very much that she had told her husband, and at the same time her daughter, all sorts of nonsense. Emotions were bursting out, and the woman said in a low voice, "Amazing things are happening in this world," and unnoticed, I turned into an exact copy of Aunt Lisa. She's just as quarrelsome and mean. Can people change so drastically? What's wrong with me? I wasn't like this, wasn't I? Or just didn't notice? The woman didn't even try to find an answer to this question, because she knew it well, only she was afraid to say it out loud. She reluctantly set about cleaning up, but youthful memories came flooding back with renewed vigor. She could no longer resist the urge to see her sister, and Nancy began to hurriedly pack. Just need some air and distraction, and the bad thoughts would finally leave her head. I'm going to go tell a tale from my kin. Even though Natalka's made a lot of blood for me, still, we had a beautiful moment together. 20 years have flashed by imperceptibly, and during this time, a lot has happened in a series of different events. There were moments that today Nancy would rather not remember. But time, if it does not even cure old wounds, makes one look anew at the affairs of bygone days. Such were roughly the thoughts hovering in the mind of the 40-year-old woman. As she rode the bus to the neighborhood where her aunt lived, Lisa bore her widowhood and fate with fortitude. And even with a sense of pride, she grieved briefly after the funeral of her beloved husband. She found solace in occult practices. In the late 90s, many were obsessed with fortune-telling on tarot cards, astrological predictions on the stars, and other hoaxes. Molly's mother was not just interested in such directions, she thoroughly studied them. And the aunt did not even try to hide from her daughter, where she disappears in the evenings. Molly was horrified when she found out and immediately ran to her relatives. Uncle Alex, Aunt Katja, help. I'm very afraid for my mom. She goes to some very dubious events, and strange people I'd never seen before started coming to our house. Alex promised his niece, "You're not prematurely pining away. The devil is not as bad as they make it out to be. But I'll be sure to drop by the other day." The man wanted to make an appointment with his sister-in-law by phone, but Lisa did not pick up the phone. So he went to the widow's house. The woman did not open the door for a long time. And when the guest was about to leave from behind the massive door, there were signs of life in the form of a ball of footsteps and mumbling. Then the door opened slightly, but a chain prevented the guest from crossing the threshold. The hostess did not waste time on greeting, but asked sternly, "Why did you come?" "Lisa, it's me. You didn't recognize me. I was recognized." "And what of it?" "We have nothing to talk about." "I need to talk to you." "James, no. And there's nothing to connect us anymore." The woman wanted to close the door, but Alex managed to get Lisa's foot in the door. "Wait, I wanted to talk to you about Molly. She's my niece, and I care about her." The woman sang snackily. The guest was not even on a joke frightened, thinking that this viper in human form will now release its poisonous sting. But instead of this instrument, Lisa used the words, "My Molly has someone to take care of her. So we don't need your help, kinfolk, and we're better than Sasha. Go goodbye and don't come back. I don't want to see you or your wife or your restless Nancy. She's always leading my daughter astray. And one day I shall simply be forced to take measures to counteract her bad influence." Again, in the voice of the daughter-in-law, there was a threatening hiss, and Alex pulled his foot away. The door slammed shut in his face, and he still stood on the landing for some time, thinking over the last words of the relative. At home, the head of the family told his wife in detail about his visit. In conclusion, added Katusha, "You will not believe it, but for the first time in my life, I experienced panic terror. From Lisa smelled something so demonic. And honestly, I don't want to go out with her anymore." Kate laughed. "Alex, you're a man. Don't get your head in the game. Only highly respected people can believe in witchcraft and fortune-telling. But you are an educated man." Alex thought for a long time before answering. "Katja, but you won't deny that conspiracies and curses work." Men at work told such stories that gave me goosebumps. Nancy decided to add her weighty word. "Mom, Dad's right, because magic rituals work. It all depends on who's doing them." Molly told me something that takes your breath away too. Kate hugged her husband and daughter. "My darlings, you are bringing your own fears upon yourselves. We have rumors like that at the hospital too. And sometimes we hear even worse stories. I can assure you that there is no scientific proof of magic, white or black." "Still," Nancy exclaimed, "but something does come true. It's pure coincidence. Human life is full of different events, so coincidences are not rare. But for some reason we try to explain such facts with mysticism." Nancy very much wanted to believe her mother, but all the subsequent events convinced her that there are no coincidences. After that fateful visit of Alex to her brother's widow, only a few days had passed, and Molly appeared at their house herself late at night with a suitcase. It wasn't hard to guess from the redness of the girl's eyes that she had been crying. Kate rushed to her niece at what had happened. "Don't you look like yourself?" Molly appeared in the hallway. I can't take it anymore. Mom's completely lost her mind. She let a whole bunch of strangers into the apartment. She says they're the best magicians in the country. They sort of came to the contest, and my mom voluntarily and gratuitously decided to give them our apartment for temporary residence. Alex excitedly said maybe I shouldn't have left my mom with suspicious people. The niece hotly objected. Uncle Alex, what can I, a schoolgirl, do? I told her that I'll stay with you until these people change from our house. They're generally so harmless, except for one. Her name is Military. She's all black, and her eyes are black too. How'd she stare at me? I almost fainted when she said in a huge voice that my future was in gold that glittered like a husk of seed. My knees buckled in an instant. My mom went after that woman for asking questions, and I packed my bags for you. You should have. You don't want to be jinxed by that. Nancy took her sister's suitcase and led her guest into a small room where she had long ago equipped for herself a girlish realm. Since the topic was a hot one, the girls continued to discuss it. Nancy's parents were also excited by the unexpected appearance of their niece. Alex had time even before dinner to find out the meaning of an obscure word. That's why he started the evening meal with a minute of enlightenment. I've looked through the encyclopedia and found out that in Spanish it means seeing the future. So your mom's guests are nicest fortune tellers. In the circle of relatives, Molly felt under reliable protection. She answered quite cheerfully, yes, I don't really care how the name is translated. It's just that I'm worried about my mom because she's often 20 in parallel worlds. And I don't like it at all. There are only a couple months left, and school will be behind me. And then I can leave this town, and everything will be just a bad memory. Kate complimented her niece. That's right, Molly. You're a smart girl, and I'm sure you'll get into college. Take an example from your sister. Nancy went to college. She's going to be an architect. This profession will never lose its importance. Molly grinned. No, I'm not going to design cities, and I don't want to stay here either. I'll go to the capital. There are more opportunities there. Molly stayed with them for almost a week. Afterwards, she confessed it was the most wonderful time of her life. But suddenly, Lisa showed up in person to pick up her daughter. This time, however, the relative was the personification of peace. Kate, though surprised by the visit, was also hospitable. Lisa, come in. We were just about to have tea. The girls made cupcakes. Let's taste them together. Mila smiled at the invitation, but refused to have tea. Some other time, we'll have tea. There's no time now. I'm actually here for Molly. Lisa stomped in the hallway, waiting for her daughter to gather her things. At last, Molly appeared with her suitcase and said to the guest in a monotonous voice, You don't hold a grudge against me. I didn't mean to offend you. Thank you for taking Molly in. Alex was very glad that his daughter-in-law showed some humanity. You're welcome. We're not strangers. Aunt Lisa looked at him with a strange look, and then said in the same colorless voice, We should be careful at bus stops, especially in the evening. They're running around town without great-grandchildren. Drunk. An icy chill ran down Nancy's back. Aunt Lisa, what are you talking about? Did the aunt look at her? It's no big deal. I just wanted to warn you. And you get ready for the wedding. You'll be married soon. Nancy laughed in her aunt's face. Aunt Lisa, you're not making any sense. You sound like a real fortune teller. I'm going to have to disappoint you. I'm not getting married in the next 5 years. Only after I graduate will I plan to start a family of my own. Her aunt looked at her again with a penetrating gaze. There's no escaping the fates. What one's destiny says will come true. Molly signaled to her sister that her mother was a little out of sorts to spare her relatives an unpleasant visitor. She took her parent under her elbow and led her towards the exit. Mom, everyone, let's go home. Picked up from your friends. All kinds of nonsense. And now you're talking nonsense. When the sister-in-law and niece disappeared out the door, Alex twirled his index finger at his temple. What became of the woman? Katia is talking such nonsense. That's your department. Tell me, is Lisa really out of marbles for rollers? Or is she just plain fortune teller? Kate grinned. More like the second. It's a special time right now. It's the millennium, and old superstitions have come to life and new ones have emerged. The public's interest has to be piqued somehow. Here's a hoaxer from different levels trying to do just that. The topic of conversation smoothly flowed to different ways of fraud, fortune tellers, and fortune tellers. Every member of the family had a story to tell. Therefore, dinner and the rest of the evening turned out to have a mystical tinge. In the morning, all three of them forgot about Aunt Lisa's visit and her ramblings. It wasn't until months later that Nancy remembered everything her mother had talked about in Molly King's hallway. Nancy barely had time to touch the bell button before the door swung open, and all the passions were back in her arms. "Nancy, how have I missed you? You have no idea how long it's been since we've seen each other. Probably 5 or 6. A disgruntled voice came from the darkness of the hallway. "Molly, let the man into the apartment. What's the fashion?" On the doorstep to hug Molly, Mom waved her hand. "This is my sister, and I have every right to greet her with violent emotions." Molly let the guest through and pointed towards her room. "Come on, we'll have tea later." "Nancy, I agree." I nodded only from the table. "So I don't want to eat. I got my own things to do, and I'm here for you." "Yeah, I met Ben yesterday, and I told him to tell you to come by right away." "You have no idea what I dug up the other day. Probably some kind of mind-blowing wedding scenario." "No, you didn't." Molly shut the door tight and winked at her sister. Mom's gotten very inquisitive in her old age, and a few times have gotten her in the act. Nancy muttered, "Let her eavesdrop rather than engage in dubious business." Molly and stared pensively at one point. "Yeah, I'm having a hard time re-educating her. Honestly, I can't believe Mom was ever obsessed with any of this stuff. Although, you know, sis, deep down, I believe in predictions myself sometimes. You're not alone." "I do too, especially lately." Both women were silent, each thinking about something else. Molly went to college after high school, but graduated with great difficulty. She took 2 academic leaves of absence because she was woefully short of time for the main business of her life: weddings. Nancy's father, Alex, gave his niece an inexpensive camera for her 17th birthday. It happened just before Nancy's wedding, and Molly decided to capture the event. For 2 days, she ran around with the camera, shooting everything. But the newlyweds never got a CD. For a long time, Molly fed them breakfast, and then she left and did not appear in her hometown for 3 years. Years went by in life. Every day more and more pulled the spouses into its maelstrom. And Ben and Molly less and less often remembered the day of their marriage. And for the first time in 20 years, with Molly's encouragement, Nancy remembered that she had once shone in a snow-white bridesmaid's gown. She sighed sadly and sat back in her chair. "Come on, Molly, dazzle my imagination. I'm getting ready." The woman shuddered. "Oh, you scared me." I hesitated for a moment. "Now just 1 minute." Molly rushed to the fashion, on which were laid out in strict order all the paraphernalia necessary for a wedding planner. Guests with a grin nodded in the direction, prepared in the props. "You got a job coming up." "You're right, as always." Some moms I know asked me. Their granddaughter's getting married on Saturday. Actually, they've been common law for 2 years, and suddenly they're getting married. It's usually rushed when there's a new addition to the family. I'm never interested in such details. My business is to please clients and receive for their services money. Those are the 2 pillars of my business. Nancy said with a sneer. "I'm sure you're doing a great job with that." Molly jerked her chin up. "I mean, I'm trying. Do you know how competitive this market is?" "I have no idea. I'm not really in the entertainment business. I'm more concerned with my home and my unenviable job." My sister sighed. "That's when I was drinking. I shouldn't have dropped out of school." "Well, let's not talk about sad things. Do you want to know what my competitors call me?" Nancy looked at her sister and mentally noted that the years had only slightly affected Molly, and she still remained as vivacious as in her youth. There wasn't a single wrinkle on her face, and her blonde hair was neatly localized down to her shoulders. As her sister didn't answer her question, Molly began to shake her. "Nancy, why are you silent? I don't recognize you." The guests laughed. "I was speechless at the sight of your beauty. You're all dainty and well-groomed, aren't you?" "Aya." Molly let out a heavy sigh. "What beauty is there? Pitiful glimmers of the youth that escaped me. It's nice to eat." "So, where were we?" "The competition. They gave you the nickname Molly," in a well-practiced voice, said, "Please love and welcome. This is a rare exclusive." Wedding General Nancy clapped her hands. "You know what, sis? There's something in that, isn't there? I can't judge your professional qualities because I've never been to one of your events, but you have the exterior to match the rank of general. And I'm talking about 20 years in the business. I love making people happy. Too bad most of the time that happiness is fleeting. That's for sure." Suspicious sounds were heard behind the door, and Molly was silent. The guests looked at their cousin with fear. "Do you have mice?" Molly laughed. "One mouse of enormous size." The hostess walked to the door and said loudly, "Mom, stop scaring people. Come on in." The door opened slowly and creaked open just enough for Lisa to slip in. "Molly, the kettle's boiling. Are you going to have tea now or a little later?" "Mom, in about 5 minutes we'll have a little more in confidence." Okay. You girls talk. And I'll wait for you in the kitchen." The door closed, and Molly confessed to her sister. "Sometimes I feel like Mom's trying to make up for her past mistakes. I feel sorry for her, but I don't know how to help her." "Molly, it's very simple. You have to love your family. Parents value love, care, and respect for their children above all else." Anastasia's voice treacherously trembled, and Molly hugged her sister Nancy's ears again. "Don't beat yourself up. It wasn't your fault. It was an accident. That's just the way it is. But your mother warned us about the accident. We didn't believe her. We thought her words were nonsense." Nancy felt tears come to her eyes. She remembered again the terrible day her parents had died. It had happened shortly after their wedding to Ben. The newlyweds learned that a new addition to their family was expected and hurried to please the future grandparents. Alex, according to a long-established tradition, decided to celebrate this event and invited his wife to dinner at Kate's restaurant. Who knows, maybe this is the last time fate gives us such an opportunity. The grandchildren will come, and you and I will get stuck in troubles. Hey, young people, are you with us or not? Nancy had been a cab driver since the first weeks of her pregnancy, and the thought of going to a catering establishment made her nauseous. "No, I'd rather not. I'll ruin your evening." Kate seconded her daughter. "You're right, Nancy. In your position, it's better not to take any chances." Alex, for such an occasion, paid for his new suit, and his mother wore a sequined evening dress. They ordered a cab, and in farewell, the mother, already from the car, shouted, "Tomorrow morning we'll call each other." Nancy did not even suspect at that time that it was the last time she saw her parents alive. As eyewitnesses told later, the couple were among those waiting at the bus stop for the last bus. Nancy's parents usually used their own car, but her father never got behind the wheel, even if he killed a little. So that evening, the couple decided to take public transportation. Besides them, there were 6 other people at the bus stop, but no one noticed how a foreign car jumped out of the corner at a great speed. Everything happened in a split second, and the silence of the night was broken by the screams of the victims from the action of the accumulated. Nancy's inadequate parents were in the epicenter of the accident, and both died on the spot. It was a terrible blow. Had it not been for Molly, Nancy probably would not have recovered from that tragedy. Strangely, after the deaths of her late husband's relatives, Lisa had permanently abandoned her fascination with otherworldly practices. Molly still had her arm around her sister's shoulders as well. Nancy stroked her hand. "Thank you for everything." "Why are you thanking me all of a sudden? Are we breaking up?" "No, it just came to me. It happens to me a lot too. I've been to other people's weddings. It's exhausting. Sometimes I have to turn myself inside out to get the damn fee in full. You know how demanding clients are nowadays. You sign a contract where everything is laid out, and some particularly zealous characters start picking out flaws. About 2 years ago, I had such a case that one super-duper dad rejected my script. The man found a few games with guests offensive, and he reduced the fee himself without warning. I didn't know there was such a thing. How'd it end? In court. I'm not the kind of guy who gets screwed over with impunity. That asshole paid me for moral damages, but I got a lot of nerve. Molly, you're really good. A real general. The woman corrected the wedding general. Speaking of birds, you and I have been talking, and we've completely forgotten about the main thing. That's right. You were going to surprise me. I'll get right on it. Just be patient, and you'll be in for a surprise. Molly began fiddling with the equipment. She accompanied the process with exclamations of horror. Everything is covered with dust. The equipment doesn't like such carelessness. We'll have to fix it right away. Nancy remembered how her younger sister in her childhood had also worked wonders, for which she had been scolded by her parents. She really wanted to help Molly. Maybe I could be of some use to you. You know, my Helen is very advanced in technology, and she taught me a few things. Without turning around, my sister cheerfully said, "Thanks, I got it." The thing is, it's an old tape, and you can only watch it on an old player. I can't get my hands on it, and I can't get my archives in order. Molly fiddled with the equipment for another 5 minutes, but her efforts were successful. Something inside the device buzzed powerfully, and the TV screen showed a splash screen. Nancy and Ben together forever. The sound is a little bad, so we'll be watching a silent movie tonight. Both women held their breath into the screen. They didn't notice Lisa silently enter the room again the moment the bride did. That is, the Nancy from the past tried to wave her hand in white gloves. Tears of happiness. The symbolic bouquet fell to the floor. Molly and the mother very clearly pronounced bad luck. Unfortunately, it was Nancy who flinched and looked at her aunt. Molly swooped down on her mother. "Mother, are you like Hamlet's father's shadow walking around the apartment? Couldn't you have knocked?" The older woman excused herself. "You said 5 minutes. It's been half an hour. The kettle's cold. We're in no hurry." Lisa took to the kitchen, muttering to himself. "I don't know how to please her." Nancy, in a trembling voice, asked Molly, "Maybe that's enough movies for today. Wait, that's the most important thing I haven't seen. Just one more minute. You don't need patience. I remember this moment well. When my bouquet fell, a strange woman picked it up. She said something else to me, but I couldn't make it out. It was awkward to ask again at the time." Molly, a key clicked, and the machine buzzed loudly again. The flamboyant-looking guest first held out her bridesmaid's bouquet, but immediately changed her mind. Her lips moved, and Nancy heard clearly, "It is not your destiny. You cut down your tree for me." White streaks ran across the screen, soon replaced by pictures of wedding fun. The guests whispered creepy. "And that's exactly what you wanted to surprise me with." Molly grinned smugly. "Not really. There's nothing surprising about any of this. I know from experience that brides often drop or forget their bouquets. The strange thing is different. The ladies in black are the stuff of legend. That soothsayer face friend of Aunt Lisa's. Yes, but I have no idea how this messenger from hell ended up at your wedding. I have no idea either." That fact came as a real shock. Images from the past and images of people who were no longer alive began to spontaneously resurface in front of the woman's eyes. For some time, Nancy remained in a state of shock, and Molly became worried. "Nancy, why are you so excited? Let's go and have a cup of tea. You'll be out of here in no time." "No, I don't feel like doing anything. Look, don't worry, it's all over and done with. If I'd known that movie would make such an impression on you, I wouldn't have shown it to you." Nancy got up abruptly, "And I'm going to go. I need to be alone for a while." Molly, not hiding her resentment, muttered, and the tea mother tried, already prepared everything. "Molly, don't be offended. Next time we'll have tea." And so we sat. "I don't understand, Nancy. Why are you making such a fuss? There's nothing we can do about it anyway. What's the point? You have a perfectly happy family. It's safe to say you've had a good life." "Yeah, you could say that. Or you could say it another way. I have a favor to ask you. If you can find out about this fortune teller." Nancy met the family hearth with a ringing silence. On the heart was empty and did not want to do anything. The woman walked to the bedroom and stood in front of the large mirrors. She asked her reflection, "How happy are you, Nancy?" And she cried because she knew the answer to that question. She was no longer surprised that for the second time in one day she had to mentally answer him. Why had fate made such an abrupt reversal now? A period of reflection. Nancy's post-graduation period was short-lived. She realized that she was more attracted to architecture in the classical sense of the term. The girl thought that her father would be happy to hear about her decision. Alex cautiously asked Nancy, "Confess, did you really choose this institute by the call of your heart or for the sake of principle?" "Daddy, how could you think that about me? You know that I have been dreaming since my childhood." Father interrupted his daughter. "Childhood dreams and adulthood are not the same thing. Dreams most often turn to dust, and one realizes that one has fallen into one's own trap. I really don't want my daughter to be trapped like that. But if it's a sensible choice, I'm only happy for you." Nancy assured her father, "Papa, it is a sensible choice. I really want to be an architect. And it's a decision I made quite consciously." At this point, the discussion of their daughter's future was over, and the parents did not bring up the subject again. Despite the big competition, Nancy entered the university from the first time. She was also lucky in that she was enrolled on a budget. The young girl's imagination of the future was imagined full of grandiose affairs. About meetings with guys, she did not think then, because she considered the main goal of her studies. Together with her in the same institute entered the girl who studied in their school. Only Betty had graduated a year earlier than Nancy. The acquaintance was very happy when she met Nancy in the corridor of the institute. "Hello, nice surprise. At least one familiar face." Nancy was happy too. "It's nice to see you too. What department are you in? Did you have to apply for economics?" "I didn't get enough points to get into the budget, so I had to apply for a fee. No other options. I failed last year. And this year I'm unlucky again. It happens. Yes, fate doesn't favor everyone, but unlucky in love. You know, I've got a guy who's got 1,000 kilos in the firm and money at our institute, probably the son of some important official." "No, you didn't. My beau has already graduated as a mechanic and works in a car service. The money's just flowing into his pocket. You know, I've only been dating him for a month, and he's already given me a ring." Nancy gasped in surprise. "You're marrying him so fast?" Betty rolled her eyes. "If only our relationship were still in the active stage of development. Vetpova gave me a ring with a small stone in it, so no hints yet, but I'm waiting for him to get an engagement ring." Such conversations between young men and maidens are frequent, and Nancy has had to listen to confessions from close friends more than once, and this time she only listened to Betty's revelations out of politeness, and by evening she had forgotten the conversation with her altogether. About a week later, the girls met again in the same hallway. Betty immediately gave Nancy a friendly peck on the cheek and said meaningfully, "You and I, like in the popular song, at the same place at the same hour. How can you not believe in fate?" Nancy waved it away. "Come on, it can't be otherwise. After all, we're at the same institute and walk the same corridors." Betty reluctantly agreed. "That's true, but I'm a bit of a fatalist. I'm generally fascinated by all things mystical. Ben laughs at me, says my brain's turned the wrong way." Nancy thought she'd be offended by a guy who criticized her intelligence instead of complimenting it, but she did not express her opinion aloud, for she considered her acquaintance with Betty an inconsequential everyday trifle. What was my surprise when she saw Owl Island again the day after class. Betty was a little confused. "I'm sorry to barge in on you, but I have some business to attend to." Nancy was in a hurry to get home because she had promised her parents to clean the apartment, but good manners prevailed, and she asked politely how I could help you. The friend immediately became animated. "You see, my Ben is having a party tonight. He asked me to invite the girls so that their mail company wouldn't get bored. I asked my friends, but they all had emergencies tonight. So help me out, friend." Nancy intuitively put her hands to her chest. "Betty, I'm sorry, but I can't make it tonight either. I've got a lot on my plate at home. I have a paper due. I'll do it another time." She responded by tugging on the sleeve of her raincoat. "I promised Ben today, and I don't want to disappoint him. He's so cool, so macho, and I can already see myself next to him in a suspended dress." Nancy shook her head, and Betty continued to talk her down. "Look, this is a chance to find a good guy. My Ben doesn't hang out with just anyone. His friends list includes the sons of bureaucrats and professors. Betty, I don't need this. I'm not looking for a life partner yet. I have other interests. You should. You have to do everything in a timely manner, especially not marriage and children. That's what my mom says, and I trust her completely." Nancy did not enter into an argument with the intrusive girl and made a new attempt to get rid of her. But at that time, a young man of a political build approached them. "Tanyusha, this is your friend. Pleased to meet you. Ben, master of old and new iron." The guy extended his hand to her and had to respond with a reciprocal gesture. Betty's bow behaved confidently and even a little on the head, and Nancy was confused by such an onslaught. So it took Ben less than a minute to persuade the girl. She spent another quarter of an hour to warn her parents and change her clothes. The party was a buffet, so all the guests behaved relaxed. Nancy only drank orange juice. She wouldn't even touch the food. Betty stayed close to her lover all evening. She looked faithfully into his eyes and caught his every word. Such subservience disgusted Nancy, and she waited impatiently for this social performance to end. Several times Ben approached her and inquired, "Nancy, I hope you're not bored." She smiled. "No, not at all. You're having a wonderful time." As the guests began to leave, Nancy slipped into the hallway and pulled her coat from the coat rack. She opened the door. Outside, she breathed a full sigh and thought she had just wasted an entire evening. The next day, Betty voiced her grievances. "Why did you run out early? You could have warned me. I'm looking for my friend, and my friend isn't here. Our relationship is hardly what you'd call a friendship in the old days. So I don't owe you anything, and you don't owe me anything." I was very tired and decided to leave. Betty waved her hand. "Come on, you don't have to explain. It's clear enough." Everyone forgot and dispersed. Nancy was very happy about the peaceful resolution of the situation, but she still walked around looking around for a few more days. She didn't want to meet Tanya anymore, but quite unexpectedly, she met the fiancé of her acquaintance. It was all the fault of some malfunction in her father's car. Alex had been complaining about the problem for a long time, but he didn't have time to go to the car service. And one morning, when all the family wanted to go to the village, the car did not want to start. The men sighed, doomed all the dead. "My cars need to be repaired." Alex called his good acquaintance, and he promised to pull him to the nearest car service. "Alex, such masters there will put the car on a wheel by evening. In aviation, they put equipment on the wing, but here on the wheel. Really, it's a great idea." Alex agreed with that conclusion. Well done. I wouldn't have thought of that." Nancy had never been interested in cars before, but here she started to get curious. I really wanted to see with my own eyes how the craftsman would create a miracle. After all, my father's car was quite an ancient unit and needed to be replaced long ago. But Alex did not even want to hear about buying a new car. "My Swallow has not yet exhausted its resource. It is still capable of what a pile of ruled parts can do." The father did not say, but the daughter believed him. That day she too decided to support her father. "Dad, can I come with you?" Alex wondered. "And what will you do there?" "A car service is not a beauty salon. There is nothing interesting there for a young girl." "So what? I'll just watch how scrap metal is transformed into a workable unit." "If that's the case, then let's go." The master who was to perform the miraculous transformation before her eyes. The miraculous transformation was Ben. The young man recognized her immediately and was very happy. "Nancy, what brings you here?" "It's just my dad's car doesn't want to work. We will now look and determine the cause of disobedience of your machine, and then treat it." Alex was surprised that his daughter knew the master, who was recommended to him by an acquaintance. Trying not to attract attention, he whispered to his daughter Nancy, "I did not suspect that you have such useful friends." The girl also answered in a whisper, "Dad, Ben is not my friend. He's a fiancé. Thin Isle of yours. Remember I told you about the girl from our school? We're in college together, only she's in economics." He made a statement that said, "Yeah, I remember something. I think her father once worked in my brigade, but the pay didn't suit him, so he moved to the public utilities." Yeah, that's his exact last name. While the daughter and father were discussing mutual acquaintances, the car service workers promptly carried out diagnostics and began to fix the problem. Ben was pleased and informed the customers. "It could have been worse, but it was nothing serious. So in an hour or a little more, your car will be on the road." Alex was glad to hear from the master not so much reassuring prognosis as an affectionate nickname, which he always used when it came to his car. He gave Ben's hand a long shake. "Thank you for your understanding. It's a pleasure to have you take on the task of repairing my car. It is rare to find such competent professionals among young people today." Ben accepted the praise with a satisfied smile. He himself did not take his eyes off the client's daughter when the car was completely ready. Master and suggested Alex to check the performance of the vehicle. Nancy, the father, settled into the driver's seat and lost sight of his daughter for a while. Only later Nancy realized that Ben in such an innocuous way eliminated the father to the girl with whom he needed to talk privately. The young man, without further preamble, stated to Nancy, "After that evening, I don't find myself in a place." The girl did not understand what the boy, who by all accounts was not lacking in female companionship, was getting at. "Are you ill?" Ben felt his eyes. "Perhaps my condition can be called a disease. Your image haunts me day and night, and I don't know what to do about it." "Are you kidding? I thought you had a real health problem." "My mom works at the hospital. She could help you get checked out." "Oh, thank you. I'll definitely take advantage of this unique opportunity, but a little later. For now, I'd like to ask you a small favor." Nancy had a responsive heart, and she prepared to listen to the guy's request. She even thought that Ben would ask for something to put into words for Tatiana, but what he said instantly made the blood rush to her face. "Nancy, I'd like to meet you. We could go to a movie or take a walk in the park. How would you like that?" The girl was confused. But you, Ben, guessed what confuses Nancy. "If you mean Tatiana, we have nothing in common with her." "Absolutely nothing. She and I were having a nice time together, that's all." Nancy remembered Betty proudly showing her Ben's gift. The island had acted arrogant, as if she were the most attractive girl on the planet. Nancy had wanted to rub her nose in it from day one. And she had quickly realized that the most effective way to do that was to steal Betty's fiancé. Nancy lowered her eyes languidly and barely audibly mumbled, "I don't mind going out with you." Nancy didn't realize that her love had taken her on a whirlwind spin. After her first romantic encounter with Ben, and just a few dates later, she was already catching every word he said. Then Duden gave her an engagement ring 3 months later, and Nancy immediately agreed to become his wife. When Betty learned that her friend had literally stolen her fiancé from under her nose, she wished her, "One day you will give with someone else's happiness, and I wish only one thing to happen as soon as possible." Betty was not among the guests at their wedding. Nor did Nancy meet her afterward, because her life had changed dramatically after her marriage. First, her parents died tragically, and then a sweet little girl was born. Helen, the young mom, had to leave her studies at the institute and devote all of herself to her family. But she made this choice without regret. Only years later, she began to think more and more often, it could have been different if you hadn't dropped out or married another guy. The sun had been pouring down without mercy since early morning today, and the air conditioners were on full blast in the beauty salon. And Vanessa was enjoying the coolness. She was lazily flipping through the latest issue of a fashion magazine, waiting for her son's turn. Only Sophia knew how to turn the latest dunce into a real beauty, and Vanessa treasured her friendship with her very much. She glanced at her watch and took another magazine from the stack. Thoughts slowly flowed through her head like boats in a pond, and Vanessa calmed their slow, even relaxed flow. She was happy with everything, with the way her life had turned out and with her trade, which brought a steady income. Sophia appeared in the waiting room and, in a sweet voice, said, "You are already here. Now literally just a minute more. Please bear with me. I will sign a little to the client and invite you in." Vanessa condescendingly waved his hand. "Don't worry, Sophia. It's such a divine chill. I'm ready to sit for hours. I am very glad you are comfortable." And Vanessa sank back into pleasant thoughts. When the Creator had distributed his gifts to the earth, he had obviously not noticed the small villas, so she had gotten practically nothing but inventive minds. Unique, capable with an ugly girl manifested itself already in kindergarten, and educators were surprised. So ugly, but so smart. Probably, she will become a scientist when she grows up. Vanessa's parents do not bother to take care of their daughter. They were constantly fighting. The girl was thrown like a ball from one old man to another. But since Vanessa was an unusual child, she liked this way of life. Then her parents separated for good, and the girl was sent to be raised by her great-grandmother, who lived on an abandoned farm. Vanessa still does not know to whom the old woman was a relative. Her real name also forever remained a mystery, because the grandmother's name was simple and clear. The old vein. The old woman was not offended by this attitude, and cheerfully said, "Let them call me Pan at least, as long as they paid me money." The grandmothers practiced fortune-telling and conspiracies for the villagers. Vanessa had heard that she was a hereditary sorceress. Sometimes, when her grandmother was in a good or cheerful mood, she helped her. These were especially happy moments, because the girl could go into the room where the grandmother prepared potions from herbs and summoned spirits without fear. The child's brain memorized and absorbed everything. Despite her young age, Vanessa already knew that in the future she would also predict the future and reveal the secrets of the past. Perhaps in time, Vanessa would have mastered all the dough and methods. But the old sorceress died suddenly, and the girl again began to shuttle between the houses of relatives. But the experience she had gained helped her earn money for pocket money. Already in elementary school during recess, the girl crowded near her desk. "Vanessa, tell me what I'll get for the test." And she willingly made a prediction, although such predictions did not always correspond to reality. The young fortune teller's popularity grew by the day. High school students, including boys, began to turn to her to guess the ticket number for exams. For such consultations, Vanessa took pennies. Considering that she could easily make 100 predictions a day, she always had money. But someone in the young fortune teller's clientele blabbed about her business, and Vanessa got the attention of the juvenile police, the elderly relatives she was staying with at the time. The parents of the negligent girl are just like her. She's been running scams since she was that age. What will she make of it? Since the parents of the villa could not find even the best specialists of internal affairs, and all the grandparents went into complete denial. The bright girl was determined in boarding school, but the words Vanessa ran after her on her heels, and she did not have time to spend the night in the State House. No matter how much praise the clientele 30-year-old fortune tellers, in addition to the basic techniques, divination perfectly possessed the voice, and each session turned into a small but exciting performance. The teacher and nannies carried sweet gifts to the girls and asked them to say what would happen to their relatives of the same age. The boys were most interested, and they consulted her on the matter. Once the stableman called aside, and Uncle Peter, and embarrassed, asked to make him a conspiracy for a drink. "I'm not comfortable approaching you on such a delicate matter, but my spouse has not quite got me down. She eats me up, and every day they tell me you're gonna drink. I'll put you in the hospital. Make me a potion that'll make me feel better all at once." The request was unusual, but I was coming out of the recesses of my memory the recipe by which my great-grandmother had once prepared a decoction for the director of the local collective farm. A surprising thing, but the man stopped drinking. Peter's uncle was also satisfied with the result of the treatment prescribed by the little sorceress. In a burst of the kindest feelings, he advised her to make up a pseudonym for herself. "That's what all the famous mediums do. If you don't know your name, your tongue will get confused, and your last name doesn't even sound good. It's rude and primitive. You'll have to come up with something to fit your brain." Willa thanked the stable boy for the tip and headed for the library. She spent several days poring through thick books until she found what Vivienne Monaco needed. She was sure that such a colorful pseudonym would ensure her a successful future. But soon the girl realized that for success is not enough for one poised name. It still needs connections, and the circle of acquaintances of the boarding school graduate is too narrow. Vanessa realized that she only has to wait for that happy accident, which in an instant can change everything. 3 years passed in this waiting. During this time, Vivian received a specialty of the secretary at the local school. But to get a job, the girl was in no hurry. To provide herself with a tolerable existence, she began to visit strange places, where she fortune-telling to all comers. Especially good catch was in the electric trains, but after a few successful trips, she was found out by competitors and robbed to the thread. At parting, one of the freaks warned her that if you get caught again, you'll be in trouble. Vanessa did not risk her precious life and continued practicing in parks and recreation areas. True, in the wintertime visiting such places was minimal. Freezing. Citizens refused the services of the fortune-teller, so she often went to bed with an empty stomach. The young fortune-teller was quite desperate when the very case she had been waiting for came up. During one of her visits to the park, when she was in despair, she noticed a newspaper neatly rolled up in a garbage can. Vanessa immediately clicked in my head. And it's no accident. There's definitely something in this paper for you. Ignoring the chill wind, she sat down on the ice-encrusted bench and eagerly read the advertisements at the bottom of the page. In bold print was a message to all those who have extraordinary abilities. We invite you to take part in the first regional psychic contest. Then, in smaller font, followed a brief description of the conditions and the address where the selection would take place. Vanessa immediately felt a burst of energy. She was no longer tormented by hunger cramps in her stomach and dizziness. She could already see herself winning the contest, basking in the rays of glory. That vision almost completely came true, with the only difference being that hers came in second place. But the prize of audience sympathy was awarded to her, along with a pretty hefty sum of money. The contest was divided into several stages. But all this time, Vanessa lived in the apartment of a kind woman who was obsessed with occult practices. Lisa had a daughter, but she disappeared from the house as soon as she saw the strange guests in her apartment. Vanessa herself was not very happy as a child and asked the landlady, Aunt Lisa, if we should clean up. "It's awkward. We're comfortable here, and your daughter is nowhere to be found." "It's okay. My daughter has relatives across town. My late husband's brother and Molly's family came to visit. You're not shy. Make yourself at home now." Vanessa physically felt a thin string break in her heart. She cried on the bosom of this kindest woman and told her about her hard life. Lisa comforted her for a long time, and then the legend suddenly asked her for a picture of the relatives to whom Molly had gone. "Aunt Lisa, do you have a picture of them?" The woman was surprised. "Can you tell from a picture?" "I didn't." Lisa rummaged through the drawers of the dresser for a long time until she pulled out an old photograph. "This is just one of them. Here they are, the whole family, so to speak. Vanessa ran her hand over the picture and handed it back to the owner. Things are not good in this family. Soon your niece will be in misfortune, and she's in no hurry to get married. The aunt was surprised. It's something out of a fantasy world. Nancy is only 19. She's still in school. And Molly never said anything about her getting married. And they're sisters, but as friends. Vanessa said sadly, I'm rarely wrong. Practice makes perfect in our business. If you could tell me when their wedding is, maybe I can make up for it. But the most unforeseen thing happened. The young bride was so confused that she accidentally dropped her bouquet. Vanessa was nearby at the time. She tried to catch the crowning symbol, but failed. She picked up the bouquet and wanted to give it to the girl who was standing next to her, but she noticed an unkind glint in the stranger's eyes and changed her mind. There was nothing else to do but keep the wedding amulet. Of course, Vanessa was well aware of wedding customs, but she had no other choice. Unexpectedly, she thought to herself, wondering how the couple's lives had turned out. They must have split up a long time ago. Sophia, with a smile on her face, reappeared in the waiting room and cute. Forgive me, for God's sake. Such a capricious client. As soon as she saw that you also came to me, she started to be capricious. It's not like that, and it's sticking out. I had to redo almost the whole hairstyle. The fortune teller smiled graciously. That's all right. Believe me, I wasn't bored, because I had time to think about important things. And then you have a really comfortable environment here. Ben had a hard time closing his eyelids. Well, it's morning. Uncle Ben, it's time to get ready for work. Just thinking about the bosses getting in my face. I get so sick. Nancy rolled over on her other side. Ben, you have to move the whole house. I wanted to get a little lower in bed today on the second shift. And on the subject of bosses, I can tell you that if you had your brains in the right place, you wouldn't have to take orders from someone else today. Thank you. Wife was supportive. The man threw back the blanket and grabbed his pants from the chair, but while trying to pull on his tights, he got tangled in his pant leg and almost fell. What kind of life is this? Pants don't even want to listen to me. Nancy, did you give me a steak or a potion? What kind did you slip me? I'm getting chalky in my old age. I've got nothing else to worry about. How can I poison you? You're the one who's trying to get off the hoof. If you don't stop drinking vodka by the bucketful. Why are you slandering me? I know the measure. If you knew the measure, you wouldn't have drunk your car dealership, and I wouldn't be counting pennies till payday. Wow, poor underprivileged people, you should have studied instead of dropping out of school. I'm sorry, but the cleaning lady pays the minimum wage. Nancy couldn't take it anymore. Ben, you still have the nerve to reproach me. If I hadn't married you, I wouldn't have to drive a rag across other floors. You're the one who led me astray. The woman sat down on the edge of the bed and said dreamily, and in general, if I had studied and received a diploma, I would hardly marry you. It was a hard blow to the male ego. So you regret it. 20 years together. That's not a word. Suddenly, you're regretting it. Nancy was about to say something mean to her husband, but her daughter knocked on the door. Mom, Dad, don't you get tired of the same thing every morning? If only, why do you keep trying to make the past go away? Normal people live for today. Ben grumbled to Helen. Really, it's too late for you and me to change anything. Although you do have someone. I'm thinking, who is this mysterious nickname that keeps calling you? Helen yelled from the kitchen. Parents, I love you very much, and please don't make a scene like Othello and Desdemona. The couple laughed amicably, and Ben cheerfully remarked, there's something to it, although you will not be Desdemona, but Othello of me will definitely get the same type. Only if you believe Shakespeare, Moore did not use combustible mixtures. William just decided to hide this fact, so as not to disgrace his hero. Nancy looked at the hero's watch. If you keep scratching your tongue, I'll definitely be late for work. And the boss is happy to cotton on to you. You're glad. Why should I suffer? I'm never late, and the bosses appreciate me. Time was really running out, and Ben was eating breakfast on the go. He was almost at the door when he remembered Molly's call. Nancy, yesterday, when you were away, our wedding general called. She said she had some important information for you. Call her cell phone tonight. The woman grumbled in her heart. Once again, this beast ran away without saying goodbye. What kind of manner? Is it so hard to come in for a moment, to talk humanly? Helen stuck her head through the open door. Mom, you know that Aunt Molly is not an ordinary person. I don't know how you can do this for almost 20 years in a row. I would have lost my wedding business for sure. That's what it looks like from the outside. And when pressed, you learn to sing like a nightingale and polka butterfly dance. Helen looked at her mom's mother with an expressive look at her mother's mother. I don't like that you and your father are always fighting. Maybe we're boring each other. That's what happens in life. People live, and then bam. They can't stand each other. Mom, you surprise me. I always believed you two loved each other. Love is only in books and movies. Life is so much simpler than that. You better tell me, do you still have your phone number? Helen carelessly threw Mom. Today there are more convenient and faster ways to get in touch with the right person. I'll set you up with a virtual conference call. Just tell me when it would be most convenient for you to talk to Aunt Molly. Tonight, Nancy thought for a moment. Just don't say anything to your father, and you don't want him to hear what we're going to talk about. Helen held his breath in anticipation of something interesting. Mommy, can I have some secrets? I love secrets and mysteries. I confess I overheard a little bit of your conversation with Molly last night. You were talking about a wedding, some fortune teller you mentioned. I'd love to be at the center of something intriguing. The woman interrupted her daughter's reverie. You should be thinking about your studies. The session is coming up, and you haven't opened a single book. You'll stay like me and scrub the floors until they shine. Helen grimaced. Mom, don't predict a bitter fate for me. I will definitely learn and get a diploma. And even if I have to get married at such an early age, I won't be in a hurry to continue my family. Oh, don't be so sure. Everyone says that, and then changes their mind. You're not going to put off having kids until you retire. Then my father and I will not be lucky enough to see grandchildren. My daughter looked at her watch. Oh, Mommy, I'm so late. Let's see you tonight. Nancy leisurely put her room in order and for some reason took out a photo album. The images from Molly's movie kept popping up in front of her eyes. She kept coming back to that mysterious brunette with the piercing eyes. I don't know why, but I wanted to know what the fortune teller's words meant. The time dragged outrageously slow, and she barely waited for Helen to return. Her daughter immediately skipped into the kitchen. Mammy, I remember everything and about our conversation, and about the promise not to say anything. Daddy, now, I'll just pop something tasty in my beak, and you and I will call Aunt Molly. Nancy had never communicated with her sister via video link before, and it was a real miracle for her to see her own face on the screen. The sisters said hello, and Molly got right down to business. Nancy, I'm sorry, but I'm running out of time. It's another wedding. Yes, it is. But it's Wednesday. People get married on Mondays. There's nothing you can do about it. Okay, let's not get sidetracked. Turns out my mom still keeps in touch with her. It'll be nice when I get to meet this woman. Are you sure you want to meet her? Think about it. Maybe we shouldn't change anything. Okay, I'll think about it. Then you let me know or get Lena to send me a message. The screen went out, and Helen said disappointedly, I still haven't learned anything interesting. Nancy felt incredibly tired. You still have interesting things ahead of you. Take your time, daughter. I'm going to go to bed. And will you feed Daddy when he gets home from work? Nancy had hoped she would be able to sleep. But now, after talking to her sister, anything but sleep was coming into her head. She was going over all the events she had to remember. And now one came up that she had long forgotten. It wasn't even an event. It was one phrase Ben had thrown at the wedding. It was the one that had left her confused. Even the mood was gone. By the end of the party, She told herself it was all a figment. Her fantasy had played out. The case was like this. They were accepting congratulations, and Ben was smiling contentedly, hugging her. Nancy was hot, and she threw off his arm. The young husband leaned toward her. "What's all this caprice? Don't you realize that you look so good? Only next to me alone you're not so good anymore." He put his hand on her shoulder again. Nancy wondered, wondering if he really thought that, or if he was just making a bad joke. Of course, she really wanted to find out. But then she got dizzy, forgot herself, and decided she was smug. Her husband had blurted it out without thinking. Now lying on the bed, she recalled some of their moments, some of their phrases, and she realized that Ben, even now, after he was only a short time away from being a real alcoholic, he sincerely thought he'd done her a big favor by marrying her. He also really didn't like the fact that she was working as a cleaning lady. Nancy sat up abruptly in bed. It was true, after all, when he had to sell his auto repair shop because it had stopped making a profit. Profits, as you know, are made by the businesses that are run. He naturally got drunk and consoled himself in the kitchen. "It's nothing. But now we have a nice family, an unemployed man and a cleaning lady. That doesn't sound like a businessman and a cleaning lady." Nancy hadn't paid much attention to his words then, but now she felt very hurt. The woman quickly got out of bed, opened the closet, took out a sock in which she hid her rainy day supplies, took a few bills from it, dressed, and moved toward the kitchen exit. Helen peeked out. "Oh, Mom, where are you going?" "Daddy will be here soon." Nancy grinned wryly. "Well, he'll only be here in his usual state, not even realizing what's for dinner or who's home. I'll be back in a couple hours. My mom's all out." And that has something to do with it. Nancy didn't let her daughter finish her sentence. "Stop making up stuff. Nothing has anything to do with anything. I just decided to get a haircut. I've been walking around like a bum." Helen's mouth slowly opened. For as long as she could remember, her mother's was unchanging. She couldn't imagine her mom. "You're so full of it. Go on, go. Our happiness will be crawling in soon." "Mom, why are you doing this?" Nancy didn't answer anything. She went out into the yard. That's where Ben's supposed to come from, so she'll go the other way. She walked for a long time, hesitating to enter the hairdresser's shop. It was probably because she hadn't been to such places for a long time. Finally, she made up her mind. "Hello," the master turned to her and smiled. She had just styled a black-haired woman. "Hello. I'm sorry, we're full for the day." "Excuse me." Nancy was about to turn around as a customer. Sophia said suddenly, "Your last client for today is not coming, so you can safely take this woman. You're just finishing up." The master looked confusedly at her client, then at Nancy. "You can wait a little while. If the person who signed up doesn't show up within 10 minutes, I'll take you." The customer turned to Nancy. "You wait, no one is coming." Nancy gasped. She recognized the woman immediately. It was the same fortune teller with the strange name who had picked up the bride's bouquet. Now Nancy was agonizingly trying to remember where it had then gone when the satisfied woman stood up. Nancy turned to her at once. "Not really, may I speak to you?" The woman looked at her in surprise. "Why are you rushing things? Your aunt has already called me, and we will see each other very soon. It's just that I need a little time to get everything ready." Nancy started to feel scared. Rent leaned into her, not trying to change anything. It wouldn't work. Just accept it the way it's going to be, no matter how much it hurts you. Nancy recoiled from her. She had long since known that prediction she had once voiced to them. Aunt Lissa had also been pronounced military. Ta flashed her black eyes. "Don't be afraid. Sometimes you have to lose something to find it." She walked out of the barbershop and Sophia took a breath. "I'm always afraid when she comes to me. Even though Vivian Lee always smiles kindly, leaves a nice tip, but when she looks at me with her eyes, it's like she sees everything from the inside out. She's such a legend." "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm talking to you. Have a seat. What would you like?" Nancy smiled. "I'd like to change everything." Sophia smiled back. That's what we'd like. Shall we get started? Nancy looked at herself in the mirror and didn't recognize herself. Was she really attractive? And quite a young woman. She's Sophia. You're a wizard. It's not me. It's your desire to be different. I'll give you the number of a very good craftsman who can fix your hands. Nancy didn't realize she had nodded. Nancy's predictions were all wrong. There was certainly nothing of the fortune teller in her, because Ben had come home sober. Even Helen almost fainted. She tried not to show it, though. Daddy, come to dinner. She walked past her father twice, trying to catch the scent, but she couldn't. But her father figured out her plan. I haven't been drinking. You can. You didn't take it. I didn't take it. Helen just sighed, blushing deeply, even though they had a father like that. But Helen loved her father. Loved her mother, too, of course. But Nancy was sometimes too strict, and Papa in any condition pitied and spoiled her daughter. Ben sat down at the table, took up his spoon, and his mother, where Helen rested, who crouched in front of him with a plate, snickered if she had gone somewhere. Ben choked up. I mean somewhere. It's okay that it's evening. Helen shrugged. It's not that kind of evening. As long as the barbershops are open, she said, and bought herself a tongue. What's it for? Maybe Mom wanted to surprise Dad. They've been fighting so much lately. Barbershops. Ben put it down carefully. I didn't feel like eating the spoon for some reason. Something had been going on in their family lately. He was pretty sure there was no way Nancy could know that he'd accidentally cheated on her 3 months ago. That's just how it happened. Where had this sturgeon come from that had flown to him back in his youth? They drank, remembered and remembered. He sobered up immediately. He ran away from her headlong. Couldn't understand how that could have happened. And now Nancy has repeated several times lately that she regrets living with him. I mean, she could understand. He had done nothing to make her study then. And then I didn't do the whole putting myself first thing all the time. She would have learned. She'd look like that Sidorova, all fashionable, beautiful, and you can't tell what's on her nose. Dad, why aren't you eating? I don't feel like it. Do you know where these hairdressers work? Helen looked at her watch. Well, the ones in the center close in an hour. Another hour passed in complete silence. Ben carefully pretended to watch TV, and Helen looked at him anxiously. Something was going on in their family, and now Helen couldn't figure out who was to blame. The door slammed suddenly. Both Ben and Helen immediately jumped out into the hallway. Helen whistled. Mommy, it's definitely you. Nancy smiled embarrassedly. Her long hair was gone. Now Nancy had a short haircut and a very pretty chocolate color. Sophia also redid her eyebrows and shaped them. Well, who did? Mom, you look 20 years younger. I'm the one who looked so bad. My mood immediately soured. This is what the average family has brought themselves to. An alcoholic husband and a wife who's long since given up on herself. She glanced at her husband, ready to see the usual cloudy look. It was strange that he was still awake. Usually by 9 o'clock he was already wasted, spreading the smell of booze around him. Nancy had long ago learned to place the pillow between them in such a way that his breath hit her and not Nancy. But Ben was sober. He silently turned around and walked off to his room. Nancy grinned sadly. Apparently not at all. Ben's idea of what cleaning ladies should look like. Molly called suddenly, late at night 2 days later. That's what she always did, though. She liked to call when they were expecting a visit, when they didn't have time to visit at all. Nancy, here's the deal. The fortune teller will be here tomorrow night. She's expecting you. They wanted to call you tonight, but I could barely talk them into waiting. I won't be back until tomorrow. I can't miss an event like this. I would have filmed the whole thing. Wait, what's wrong with you? The sister finally stopped talking and stared at Nancy from the screen. Nancy rushed over to tell you. Hello, Molly. You're not talking my teeth in. Hello. What's the matter with you, Helen? You're gonna sneak the phone around your mother. Helen smilingly obeyed her aunt's orders. You know how to surprise me, Nancy. I thought it was all over. You're like a fish. Great. I don't have time for this. I'll see you tomorrow. And Molly immediately disconnected. No goodbye, no see you again. Nancy just shook her head. The years go by. Nothing changes in Molly, only the digit in the passport. Helen sat down next to her mother. Is that so bad? But she's so agile, so energetic, so fashionable. Nancy sighed. And that simple female happiness, she has neither husband nor children. 10 more years, maybe more. And then what? Helen looked carefully at her mother's mother and for the first time talked to her the way one talks to adults. Mom, do you have this very happiness? Nancy tensed up. Why do you ask? Helen shrugged her shoulders. Well, you and Dad fight all the time. Are you saying you don't want to live with him? It wasn't like that before, even though he hasn't been drinking for a long time. Nancy sighed. I don't know how to answer that. Well, first of all patience comes to an end. I think you realize that. Secondly, in a relationship, people who live together for a long time, sooner or later there comes a moment of, how can I put this delicately? Helen immediately suggested a crisis. Well, you could say that. Thirdly, yes, I have female happiness. As strange as that sounds, I have you and your father. We had a lot of good years before he got like this. Mom, why did he get like that? I can't tell you that, Helen, because I don't know. Okay, I'm gonna go to bed. I have to get up early in the morning, and I can't sleep, since we have to go to Molly's. Helen got up. Mom, take me with you, and I'll take one look at her. I'll see who I can get a look at. She's not so famous now, but she's still in the papers. She used to be a star. Nancy was just about to read to her daughter that she didn't need such meetings. As the front door opened, Ben arrived on time, which meant he was sober again. Sober Ben was not part of Nancy's plans. She'd explained to him 10 times yesterday that she had a headache. That wasn't going to work tonight, so she'd have to pretend she was asleep. Yeah, okay, but to keep me quiet in there. Nancy quickly shut the bedroom door behind her. Helen was old enough to realize that this was her mother's way of avoiding seeing her father. Hi, where's Mom? I bought a cake. Helen suddenly felt so sorry for her father. Dad, she's already gone to bed. She has to get up early. Ben looked upset. Yeah, that's right. She's a daughter. Let's go and have tea with you then. Helen nodded readily. Come on, Dad. Ben was sober again. For the second day in a row, this had not happened to him for years. The next day, Nancy and Helen arrived at Molly's house. Her sister opened the door right away. Hello, family. No hugs because I'm playing hostess and baking pies today. Lisa showed up in the hallway. Baking, she rather transfers groceries. The woman grumbled, but without malice. Helen immediately volunteered Aunt Molly. Can I help you? May I? No, you have to. Because I have a wild urge to throw this dough at the window. Helen laughed and took them after her aunt. Lisa looked at Nancy carefully. How good you look, Nancy. All is well. Well, come on, food is waiting for you. Nancy suddenly felt very scared. She's already here. She's been here half an hour since she got here. They'd walked into the room. Nancy immediately recognized the woman who had been in the hairdresser's. I looked at her closely, then reached into a black bag and pulled it out. Oh, that's my wedding bouquet. She sighed. I should have thrown it away a long time ago. You've ruined your life. I don't feel sorry for you. So throw it away. Why do you keep dried flowers? Because they're not just dried flowers. They're your destiny. The bouquet was supposed to go to one of the girls. You dropped it and forgot. Nancy said uncertainly. But they're really just flowers. Just flowers, they are before the wedding. Well, and afterward, if you do it right. But for now, they're in the bride's hands, so your destiny isn't complete in them. You threw them under your feet and trampled on your destiny. But no, I'm fine. Why did you call me here to listen to your lies? Nancy, shut up. Yes, that woman with the piercing and black eyes was absolutely right. Your sister should have caught your bouquet. Only you did the wrong thing. And all your life you've regretted marrying him. Only you've only recently been able to admit it to yourself. I kept him. That's why my love life didn't work out, although I don't regret it at all." Nancy looked up with hopeful eyes. "What am I supposed to do now? We have a daughter. It'll take her a while to understand, but she will. And you need to finish what wasn't finished at the wedding." Molly fought with the filling. The first batch of pies was already in the oven. The second batch was to be jammy. She wasn't the least bit worried about not being able to hear what was being talked about in the room. Knew for sure that if Nancy didn't, her mother would tell her everything. Molly, the woman, shuddered and turned sharply. Standing on the doorstep of the kitchen was Nancy, followed by Molly's mother and the catching legend. Nancy threw something at her, and Molly caught it. "What is it?" Nancy laughed. "It's my sweet sister, my wedding bouquet that you were supposed to catch at the wedding." Molly laughed. "Oh, I can't go with you. Tell me I'm getting married soon." Brenda spoke up calmly. "You'll marry someone you never thought you'd marry. Just one important thing right now, so that the events that are coming up in your family don't fight about you. Remember the fact that it would have happened sooner or later anyway." Molly was confused for just a moment, then putting the bouquet aside, said, "I've had enough. Let's drink tea." Helen, taking out our works of art. Helen, as if she'd just woken up from a dream. She rushed to the oven. Helen just smiled. "Study and learn. Will it be useful to you in your life?" "Oh, how useful." In the evening, when she had already gone home, Molly's mother went to bed. The two sisters sat in the kitchen with a bottle of wine. Nancy had just told her everything the fortune teller had told her, and was now thoughtfully shaking her glass, watching the wine shimmer in it. Molly asked Nancy almost in a whisper, "And what do you intend to do?" You know, Molly is not that relieved after the conversation. "I've needed to talk to Ben for a long time. I'm sure he's drinking because he doesn't love me either. We're in a trap, you know, feeling the same thing, but we can't decide. If you're wrong, if he does love you." Nancy shook her head. "He doesn't." Molly was silent for a while. Then she asked, "Okay, you talk to him. And then what?" "Then you won't believe this, but I don't want to be a janitor anymore. I'm gonna take a course. I don't know what I'm gonna take, but I'm gonna take a course. Maybe even more than one. I'll get another job. I'll go to the hairdressers once a month. I'll finally become a woman." "For whom?" "For myself. Molly, you see, for me, it's like I've been asleep all these years, and now I realize I'm blaming Ben for everything. It's not that simple. What can I say? It's a shame about Ben. I think he'd be lost without you. Are you suggesting I give up on myself and my life and devote the rest of my life to him?" Molly shook her head. "Yes, sister, you've got fire in your mouth. I can't even argue with that. Maybe you should stay. It's too late for that. Even though it's a small town. Thank God there's no problem with cabs." The cab came surprisingly quickly. Nancy got into the car and said, "Wow, I've never driven a car like this before." The driver of the cool car smiled embarrassedly. "You see, I'm not a cab driver, but it's so boring at home in the evenings that I decided to do it. And you know, it's a very interesting profession. It turns out that so many people want to talk to a stranger." Nancy laughed out of the blue. "Oh, I'm definitely not going to tell you anything, because you won't believe me anyway." The man smiled at her in the mirror. "Where do you order me to take such a beautiful lady?" Nancy was embarrassed, gave the address. The man turned to her in surprise. "I'm sorry, I'm not mistaken. Did the compliment make you blush? I'd kill your husband and all the men around him." They drove to Nancy's house in silence. As she was getting out, the man handed her a business card. "Here you go. If you ever get lonely, you call. We'll go for a ride. Have a cup of coffee. I realize this all sounds weird, and I'm probably not at the age to ask you out like that, but I don't know what else to say to see you again." Nancy, who didn't want to take the business card, held out her hand first. "I'll be sure to call you." Ben was sitting in the kitchen. Nancy walked in, pulling the air with her nose. No smell. So her husband is sober. Third day sober. That's good. Maybe we could have a normal conversation. She sat down across from me. Ben looked up at her. Ben, I know why you drink. Nancy, well, you want me to try to quit. She shook her head. It won't work. Ben raised his eyebrows upward. That's something I didn't expect you to say at all. Why not? Because you're gonna drink. As long as I'm around you. Ben looked at her in surprise. She continued to herself. Ben, we've been together for so many years that we basically shouldn't have any secrets from each other. And I don't understand why we're both trying to hide the obvious. You don't love me. I don't love you. Ben wanted to say something, but Nancy raised her hand. Wait, let me finish. You think about it, and you'll figure it out for yourself. We're not old yet. Maybe one of us will have a chance to be truly happy for a little while. There was silence in the kitchen for a couple minutes. Then Ben said, "What's the next thing you said about plans?" "I want to get a profession and stop cleaning up after others. And you'd be great if you could reopen your workshop." Ben grinned. "Do you think I can do it?" "I don't doubt it. If I'm not around, you'll succeed. We'll invite Natasha. She'll take great pictures for the commercials. All your clients will follow you." "Ben, you've got golden hands." Helen sat silent for a long time when her parents told her their decision. Then she said to me, "Of course I don't like it. But if you decide so, if it's better for you, I hope you won't stop loving me." Ben moved out before the divorce when Nancy offered to exchange the apartment. He said, "No, Nancy, it's yours and Lena's. And I'm a man. I'll solve my own housing problems." Nancy hugged him for a second. "I sincerely wish it works out for you." Ben smiled back. "And I wish it for you too." That same day, Nancy called the number that was written on the business card. "Good afternoon. I don't know if you remember me. It's impossible to forget you. I never thought you'd call." Andrew was a retired military man, so a little straightforward, but very interesting. Nancy felt like a girl, running to him for a date. Helen told the ladies every day, "Something you broke in my mind. Usually after a divorce, people get depressed, hurt, but you and Daddy are better. You look younger and better every day. Daddy's taken over the workshop, so he'll soon outdo his former master." Nancy immediately sat down opposite her daughter. "Helen, it's true. I'm so happy for him. You just can't imagine." Helen waved her hand. "Why not?" "Well, the Jackdaw's parents are divorced, too. It's been a year, and they've been spitting at each other. But in our family, it's the opposite. You're enjoying each other's success. That's our family. It's the opposite. By the way, Aunt Molly is helping Daddy a lot. She's got a whole ad campaign going. I didn't realize. I should call and thank her." Helen looked at her strangely, grinned and said, "Call, of course." Nancy didn't like to put things off, so she called her sister Molly in the evening. She didn't pick up for a long time, but finally answered. She sounded kind of doomed. "Yeah. Hi, Nancy. Hey, what's with the dying voice? Some rich fiancé didn't pay you again?" "No, I haven't photographed a wedding in 2 months." "What's wrong, Molly? You're the recognized wedding general." Nancy was really worried. "Molly, why don't we meet somewhere, sit and talk?" "Let's do it." Molly's voice was full of doom. Nancy hung up the phone and began to pack quickly. What kind of sister was she? Because of her new relationship, she didn't even ask how Molly was doing. What if she had something serious going on? It's true what they say, happiness blinds the eyes. Molly was sitting at the table, and Nancy noticed that her sister had lost some weight. Though she'd always looked good, now she looked like the cover of a magazine. Nancy had just sat down when she noticed a ring on her sister's finger. "So you didn't even tell your sister you were getting married?" "Well, I would have. I'm just going to." I can't hear the joy in her voice. "Don't you love him? Or does he love you?" "Does he love me?" "And I love him. I love him very much. I never thought it was possible to love like that in my life. I prayed on the walls. Is he married? No, not anymore. Then I don't understand what's wrong. Why do you look like you're committing the crime of the century? Molly looked up at her quickly. That's exactly what I'm doing. Molly, stop talking in riddles. Spit out who he is, and why are you in so much pain? Molly took in a chestful of air. Nancy, I apologize in advance. I didn't know it was even possible. I've known him forever, and I'm just now realizing that he's mine, that he's meant for me. Nancy even slammed her hand on the table. Molly, stop with the romantic nonsense. Just tell me what's going on. If he's hurting you, just tell me. Is there someone to stand up for you? It's Ben. That Ben on the wall immediately realized what Molly's sister was saying to her. What does Ben have to do with this? I said, who is he? I said, it's Ben. There was a pause at the table, and Nancy was a little taken aback by the news. I remembered the fortune teller's words about not fighting amongst themselves. Do you really love him? Molly just nodded. And yes, he's somewhere under the cafe window right now worrying about how our conversation is going to go. Nancy became Molly. Let me give you a hug. I guess you really are his muse. He can do what he can't do with me. Molly looked at her in amazement. You're not offended? Of course not. I'm glad. Now everyone's settled. I don't have to feel guilty anymore, and I can give Andrew my consent. He was tired of waiting for me to get married. They hugged each other and didn't immediately notice that someone else was standing next to them. When they turned around, the sisters' eyebrows crept upward in unison. Vanessa was standing next to their table, supported by an imposing man in a tuxedo. Hello. I see I'm not the only one affected by the completed bouquet. Nancy Molly nodded at the same time, smiled. Well, I wish you happiness. It's all right now. Every tree is yours. I'm getting married too. Legend smiled a prefabricated smile that was completely out of character. And they walked towards the exit. The sisters looked at each other and laughed. They felt so at ease, as if they had really corrected some long-standing mistake. The only thing they agreed on was that at their wedding, they would be very attentive to their bouquet. Life goes on, and I don't want to experiment anymore. I want to live in happiness and love.
Subscribe and click the bell.
Now, Miranda, tell me, what is the subject and what is the predicate in this sentence? Come on, you clever girl, you'll do well, Lisa asked the girl, who had been sitting on the table for half an hour and could not make any progress. On the kitchen floor and wall, the afternoon sun was drawing shining, boring squares. It was summer in the midst of that marvelous pairing when the existence of other seasons can be forgotten. The girl was absent-minded, tired. However, with a stepfather like that, it was no wonder the child was nervous all day long. It's stuffy. I'll open the window, said Lisa, and got up and went to the window. In general, in this one room, where she worked as a tutor, for 3 years already helps the daughter of her best friend with Russian language. It had always been stuffy and dirty and dingy, ever since Miranda Kelly's mom came down with an illness that the doctors had only flailed their arms against, saying to look for money and those who would even take it on. Or better yet, accept it. The case is hopeless. It left the house in a bad way. Lisa and Kelly became friends by chance. They both went to the skating rink one winter, alone, with no idea what to do. What was the right thing to do or how to do it? They went out on the ice, laughing, holding hands. Didn't get crucified. Then it was coffee and pies at a little kiosk here at the rink that they got to talking and found out they had a lot in common. Both were fans of old jazz, hated onions. There were larks in every dish and even, it turns out, lived in neighboring yards. But there were some natural and cool differences between them. Lisa was 3 years older than her newly minted 18-year-old friend. Lisa was from a full, one might say, intelligent family with a mom, a math teacher, a grandmother, a vice principal, and a dad, an art history teacher at the university. Kelly stepped into adulthood from an orphanage and had just gotten an apartment. At times, Kelly felt incredibly lonely because of the way some people treated her due to her background, hurtful and offensive inductions. Unfortunately, even Lisa's family found such people, but she stood up to defend her friend with a mountain and said that she had had enough of giving in to her loved ones and agreed to enter the faculty of philology to devote her life to the Russian language, giving up her dream of becoming a tax collector. That's how Lisa finally defended her right to friendship. She, by the way, supported Kelly in the fact that studying for her is a good choice. There would always be a job. The girls kept no secrets from each other, except for one dark, literally life-altering one. Kelly must and after. Then, 9 years ago, there had been a romance in her life as deafeningly exciting as possible for a first love. He was masculine, strong, bold. Absolutely no match for Kelly, according to her best friend. "I'm sorry, but he's not your daddy," Lisa had said bluntly to Lisa that fateful evening when Kelly had been twirling in front of the mirror, fixing her hair and assessing whether she looked good in a little black dress and a string of pearls, albeit artificial, around her neck. "He loves me and I love him," Lisa replied. "I rolled my eyes, because this is not an argument for building a serious relationship." Her friend was like a spell. "He's a bad man from a rich family. But that's just a facade. What's he really like? Do you know what people say about him?" Kelly only shrugged her shoulders. She smiled like a fool and kissed her best friend on the cheek, wishing her good luck goodbye. "He's probably going to propose to me tonight." Ran off on a date that destroyed. Because the next morning, Cindy, as her closest contact, got a call from the hospital. Kelly was in intensive care with severe injuries sustained in a mundane accident. The doctor explained to Cindy that her friend had been beaten and thrown full speed out of a car. Serious injuries touched her entire body, and worst of all, her spine had been hit in particular. They said to prepare for the worst, that she'd be crippled. Except Kelly made an amazingly speedy recovery. But they never found her abuser. He managed to get away, literally fled the country. And then it turned out that Kelly was pregnant, and the doctors unanimously said they had to terminate the pregnancy on the background of traumatic injuries can lead to catastrophic consequences. "It's my baby," Kelly replied, when Lisa, along with doctors, came to convince her to choose herself about her health future. "It's a girl, I can feel it, and she's mine, you hear? I'm her mom, and we're going to be okay." And then, after asking to be left with her friend, Kelly forced Lisa to swear that no one would ever know the truth about who the baby's father was. That this is the monster who did this to her, throwing her literally out of her life when she became unwanted. When love was played out, when Kelly was discharged from the hospital, it seemed at first that life was slowly getting back on track. Acquaintances in the shop supported financially. Get well for now. Then, before the birth, still managed to work. And finally, the baby was born. A girl. Lisa asked Kelly to help pick out a name, and they decided she'd be a car. After all, it's an ancient, beautiful, and magical name. Lifting the baby, of course, was very hard. But Kelly was not discouraged. She worked as soon as she could snatch the opportunity of her mother's new everyday schedule. And even when the car turned 4 years old, she met a man named Charles. True, in Lisa's opinion, it was again a bad lot, 10 years older with no living space of his own. Came from a village where the whole family drank. But Kelly said he's a real man who works as a laborer, and the baby needs a father. And then, when it already seemed, well, life is more or less formed, there's nothing to complain about, then suddenly the disease came back. At first it was just back pain. And Kelly thought she'd just broken her back at work. She also cleaned the entrances of the house where she lived. Then her legs started to lose feeling. The doctor said, "What do you want?" Parents after a trauma like that. And they worked hard. And for the last 4 years, Kelly got worse and worse. Now she could barely get out of bed. Cindy, of course, helped as much as she could. But she could see that her friend's life was going badly. And Miranda was a big part of that. because Charles had lately started drinking beer to begin with, and as if only after work. Then it was replaced by stronger drinks. Lisa even had a fight with him once, sternly demanding that he think about his family. "It's not mine," curved his lips Charles, and piano, and two. But a stranger wanted to call the baby girl something strong, but was afraid. And then alcoholism raised a finger aloft. "Shaky hands is also a hereditary disease. That's me. I'm still the man of the house, so you stay out of it. What's she doing here? Although I think she's a stupid girl. Miranda, your wife is wasting your money." "I don't come to you for money," Lisa replied. She was disgusted. This man, he was not worthy of her friend. In general, such a bright, kinder Kelly should not have happened. Lisa, by the way, the truth, did not take money for preparing the little girl for school and all the other additional activities with her persuaded Kelly to accept the help of someone, and was uncomfortable. "Close the window." Charles came into the kitchen. "I can't breathe in the apartment. Would you at least mop the floor once in a while?" Lisa replied, "Wash the floors." "Are there no women in the house?" He pointed his finger in the direction of Miranda, who was sitting on a chair, waiting in a lump. "You're a little animal, hoping to escape the eye of the hunter. So rag in her teeth, and off you go. In the village at her age, she can do anything." And this. And then the stepfather, drunk again, spit on the floor, and the princess will learn. But all to no avail, waved his hand, and went to his room. By the way, the room was divided into two parts of the wives' bodies, and in the second half was kind of a nursery. But Miranda went to bed in the kitchen. There was a little couch here. It was all right. The hostess, not paying attention, stroked the Lisa pupil's head. "Let's get on with it. What are we doing?" "Kara is rolling, sailing fast on the blue sea. And I don't know what the subject is," Miranda whispered, tears in her eyes, afraid of her stepmother. Lisa sighed and looked at the words under the picture below, where the sea creature crocodile was drawn. Yes, things had gotten better with school. But Lisa also remembered very well that when her stepfather had gone to the village for a couple of days, she had made great progress. Apparently, it was just hard to learn in the oppressive atmosphere at home. When class was over, Lisa stopped by to see Kelly for a moment. "You know how she's feeling. Is there anything I can do to help? Why don't you just go ahead and go?" Waving her arms at Charles, who had the news on full volume. He loved watching it. And then he'd go on and on about how wrong the world was. The smart guy's got his life together. Lisa thought in spite, and finally left the apartment. "Lisa, when I was crossing the courtyard, heading for my place, I called out, 'Wait,' Lisa, giving my face a friendly expression with a smile. The girl turned around. 'Hello, James, the son of my mom's friend's mom and the entire extended family,' lashing out at my wife. In general, James was a nice guy. They'd known each other for about 100 years. He worked as a construction foreman, had no bad habits, went to the club. To do boxing was set on a family of children. In short, he was perfect, even cute on the face. But to Lisa's taste, he was bland, predictable, too calm. He didn't give her butterflies, as they say, in her stomach. Awe, delight. Nothing like that. They'd already gone on dates, sweetie, to an Italian restaurant. They even kissed once, and it was nothing. But on the other hand, Lisa knew in her mind that family and marriage should be built not on romantic fantasies and passions, but on mutual respect, trust, and the ability to compromise. James asked how she was. Lisa said she was fine. He volunteered to walk her home. We slowed down and talked about everything. James shared his joy. His mother had bought a second plot of land adjacent to her cottage. There was nothing on this plot yet, but the improvement would come. Lisa listened to his plans about what kind of house he would build as a vegetable garden. They will break up to eat their own organic, and almost dressed and then appeared heir, if such a thing is possible. But it turned out to be possible because James suddenly said, "Marry me." Theoretically, Lisa assumed that a marriage proposal was just around the corner, But right now, specifically, she was in shock. She stopped and slammed her eyes shut. "We can apply at the registry office tomorrow. Would you take my hand on probation?" On my James found himself hot and sweating. The guy was worried sick. He had long been in love with Lisa and could not believe that she was about to become his wife. But I don't doubt this development. My mom's cousin's sister is married to a restaurant owner named Jasmine. They've arranged for the banquet to be discounted. I made it sound like one thing. Lisa and James smiled widely. "I'm so happy. Wait for me." Lisa's hand pulled back and really didn't like it. Feeling driven by circumstances. That's what was happening now, blossoming with her. But I hadn't said yes yet. James was changing before my eyes. His smile was gone. His eyes were so pitiful, like he'd hurt a child. "Well, that is," she bounced heavily, took to adjusting the nervous purse on her shoulders. She needed to move, to do something different. The anxiety was threatening to be overblown. Probably a panic attack. I need to think. That's what usually happens when you get an offer. Apparently James had heard of it too, that women are supposed to be given time to think. "Okay, well, I'll see you tomorrow." He exhaled a sigh of relief. She nodded. "Oh, and I still have to go to the market. I will help volunteer as a brave knight to accompany." But Lisa waved her hands. "I'm not going to keep you. I have to go to the market for a long time. And then I have to go to the cosmetics store." She was making it up as she went along. She could barely fight it off. She hurried in the opposite direction of the house, so she lived to tell the tale. Now she had to make a decision. But Lisa suddenly realized she couldn't just say what she wanted, could she? Because, well, I don't love him, she admitted to herself, falling almost to a table in the coffee shop. Lattes and eclairs. 3 pieces tossed to the approaching waitress, barely glancing at the menu. In Lisa's life had so far had only one serious romance with a classmate. But they'd broken up without ever really getting close, because suddenly it was discovered that he was a hunter. Lisa couldn't imagine what it was like to stuff stuffed animals in the apartment. Her husband brought the prey to her head. And then somehow her studies spun and her own life, in which it seemed there was no place for men. She understood the excitement of her parents. They wanted to see their daughter happy, to have grandchildren. But it was also suddenly clear to Lisa that this was a marriage. What if it was a mistake? What if it wasn't always like this? Like her grandmother used to say about her marriage. Lisa happily spooned into the eclairs with fat, creamy chocolate custard. Goodbye diet, but she can afford it. Life is like that. Afterwards, Medovic cakes, Napoleon tiramisu were ordered. Lisa just couldn't stop. Finally, over a glass of milk, she asked for the bill. She reached into her purse for her wallet and found another note in it. She unfolded it and frowned. Handwriting. Miranda's was scrawled with misspellings, but what she read made Lisa cringe, apparently afraid to speak openly. After all, her stepfather was always hanging around the apartment. The little girl decided to entrust everything to paper. The fact that Lisa was shocked by a marriage proposal, made hastily and without romance at all. It all receded into the background because it was urgent to save her friend. Lisa came home and helped her mom cook. Tisha had a lesson with another one of her students. Through the web connection, she remotely set her alarm for 7 o'clock. Just yesterday, Kelly cheerfully said that Charles would leave home early because he wanted to take a quick train ride to his home village and come back in the evening. There was something wrong with the sewage system, and he needed to help his parents. And now Lisa has decided to take advantage of his absence to have a serious conversation. "This is what your daughter wrote," handed her friend a note the next day. Came, Miranda opened, walked to the room where Kelly was lying, advanced 100 to the bed, and sat down. "What is it?" Kelly squinted, reading, then rounded his eyes and shook his head. Already she opened her mouth to say something. But Lisa cut her off. "Are you saying the kid's making this up?" "No, I can understand you wanting to keep your family together. But if that's true, there's nothing left to save. The helpless woman's lips trembled as she lay there. Her eyes filled with tears, because the complaints the little girl was saying to her aunt's tutor were true. Charles, indeed, beat Mom at home really no to eat, because Charles' salary primarily on herself spent mostly on alcohol more expensive, because cheap, as everyone was told, liver, daycare. Kelly for a long time strengthened, believed that just this is a difficult period of life. After all, she's completely sick, can't work for her husband, all the household chores have fallen, and since there is no money for a caregiver, I had to take care of her. And this, of course, is not always clean. It's psychologically difficult for a man. But then one day, on a remark that he did not boil porridge for Miranda for breakfast and for lunch, there was no hot dinner either. Charles, hurt to the point of bruising, grabbed his wife by the arm and fucked her. She screamed that he was a man and making money, that he was tired of messing around with both of them. And then it was as if the husband made a cruel discovery to himself. He could behave like that. He could take out his anger and irritation on his helpless wife, who was not going anywhere. But you can't do that, Lisa said, when her friend had finished confessing how they really lived. You have to do something. You have to break up with him. Break up with him. And then what are you gonna do with me? I'm sorry, she added, immediately realizing how unfair it was to be treated so unfairly by a friend who was always there to help. But I'd be lost without him. I wish I was healthy. By the way, is there anything going on with the funds? Lisa asked. It was her idea, by the way, to sell ads to various fundraising charities. Not really, answered Kelly. The amounts needed were astronomical. And not just for one-time treatment, but for major surgery and long-term rehabilitative care. Charles, well, I thought I'd just tell you how thin it was. Charles said that if I went to the hospital, I wouldn't be with Miranda, that he put her in an orphanage. He's my husband. Said he had the right. And Kelly cried. Cindy wanted to cry too, but instead she told her friend that please don't scare the baby with tears. She went into the kitchen, looked in the refrigerator. It was empty. Ran to the store. Cooked soup, chicken cutlets, and more charlotte with apple and cinnamon was going to. Actually at home to help my parents put up wallpaper. But she called and said she had to leave for one class. And I didn't regret cleaning up a little bit. It was for a good cause. If she'd said it straight out, they'd have grumbled. Lisa fed lunch to her friend Miranda and could finally get on with what she had to do. The thing was that she had only shown Kelly one part of the note, and she had torn off the bottom part because Miranda had written something unimaginable. Lisa talked to her about it quietly after lunch. Miranda, how do you know about Aunt Redhead? See, said the bully. Daddy goes to their house. See, he says, sneaking around like a thief. The named Rick was indeed known in the neighborhood yards as a dashing, ill-mannered boy from a dysfunctional family, and his mother raised him alone. Lisa decided that she would not say anything about the possible infidelity of her friend's husband. First, we have to make sure it's not a childish fantasy. Strange isn't a mistake. Lisa found Rick suffering. The kid got behind the garages with his buddies, and they set up some kind of headquarters, lured him out, barely swore an oath. That she wasn't some neighbor with a complaint about broken windows. In fact, she's an acquaintance of the family, Miranda. What do you want? The teenager asked suspiciously. Lisa told him what she wanted. Well, he comes by all sorts of things. His mom's expecting him again tonight at 10 o'clock. So you'll probably tell his wife everything as usual. Yeah, sure. But Kelly is very sick, and she can't be worried. So we need to think about how we're going to handle this. You adults always make everything so complicated. You can come back tonight and see for yourself. And he explained where to find their apartment. Said that if you go in from one side, the house, there are small and bushes in the suburbs, all the way around, or could you then literally peek through the window? Lisa only shook her head. A little spy. But she thought the boy's idea was a great one. Lisa, where do you get to all day long? From the threshold of the native apartment, her mother swooped down on the girl and made scary eyes. James came in with a portico. said, "Do you have anything important to say for us?" Lisa almost didn't notice. Here came another trouble. She hadn't even answered him yet, and he was about to announce to everyone at the table that they were going to be married, making again, as she knew how to do, the most welcoming face. Lisa peeked into the kitchen, where they were already packing for 100. Hello. The move flew to the Mariana Trench, because James didn't come alone, but with his mom. So it wasn't good at all. Lisa glanced at the clock until hour X, when she was to become a bit of a spy. There was still a decent amount of time left. Ducking down the street was unrealistic, weird for the homies, and it would mess up the weather too. So she had to stay. Lisa changed her clothes, washed her hands, sat down at the table, turned on all her eloquence. She tried with all her might to lead the conversation into the wilds, further distant marriages, and the like, and it was working. Then James suddenly caught her hand again and smiled so big that he almost melted like an ice cream cone in the sun from his own happiness. Lisa felt on her back. It's a boom, a panic of goosebumps. I had Kelly forget this phone, made up a lie on the fly, and pleaded to no one in particular that my phone her ringtone, which all the household knew would not ring inappropriately. Lisa now. James reached for her, but she had already jumped up and gone into the other room. She got ready to go out as quickly as ever, without even waiting for the elevator. Because the drive seemed to be boiling in her blood, she ran down from the 10th floor on foot, jumping over the steps in places. The rain had stopped, but the wind was chopping viciously, sharp with damp gusts. Lisa framed her face against it with a squeeze. How good is she? She'd think about marriage. James wasn't a bad guy after all. She'd be like a stone wall behind him. Maybe it's his love that'll keep the marriage together for life and never cheat, never hurt. And the fact that she doesn't love. Maybe that's nothing to married life. Immersed in contradictory thoughts to herself, Lisa reached the right place. She pulled out her phone, turned on the video recording, and quietly walked up to class. The windows did indeed appear to be low, and the fact that there was a vent open allowed her to hear what was being talked about in the room. There was a red-haired woman, the mother of Vitya and Charles. They were sitting at the table and drinking tea, talking. And what Lisa heard came as a shock. It turned out that Charles had been hoping that Kelly would get worse soon, and then, citing the fact that he couldn't provide her with proper care, he was going to put her in some boarding school. What a bastard. Lisa, gritting her teeth. Charles was also rudely dismissive of his stepdaughter, and he was going to take the kid somewhere too. Boarding school. So Charles wanted to become the sole tenant and outright landlord. Too bad there's no way to sell it. But maybe I'll think of something, as the drinking buddy added at the end of his revelation. Heard and seen and captured, but on the camera was enough. Lisa quietly descended the hillside, got out of the bushes. It turned out to be a briar bush, clinging mercilessly to her new dress. What kind of day is this? The girl was indignant, assessing the damage to her clothes, but then laughed nervously at Kelly and her problems. That's who's in real trouble. And the main thing is not clear what to do, how to help. Lisa came home feeling very upset. It took you so long to get the phone. Yeah, she met her mother again on the doorstep. The apartment was quiet. James, my daughter, what are you doing? What the hell is that? What's the state of your clothes? Said the parent, seeing the state of your clothes. Just a little walk in the park, and got caught up. But don't start with James. I'll do the talking. Why did he leave? He didn't want to leave. He wanted to wait for you, but Clara said they had to go. Holly, don't make him angry. The mom-to-be also told me what he said. So it's clear that you're getting married. Who is clear? Give all you, daughter. Didn't you realize James, your husband? Lisa rolled her eyes. Now Mom sounded like some kind of educated, cultured grandmother. So let's drop this conversation. After all, he's the one who wants to marry me, right? So the decision to make me not too polite, but from the bottom of my heart, replied Lisa. We sighed heavily and shook our heads, but did not say anything more on the subject. We do the dishes, though. It's your turn. Lisa agreed with that. Hands on something while your head is thinking. What's the next step? It turned out to be very useful and sedative for the nervous system the next morning. Lisa wasn't ready to talk to her friend, but she just couldn't find the right words and couldn't imagine how Kelly would live with that awful truth. And if you tell Charles, how will he behave then? Lisa decided to take some more time to prepare some plan. She started to get ready for the next student's class. In general, Lisa always crossed the road strictly on the green and on the zebra. But this time, the bus was delayed because of a breakdown on the route. The students' parents were the kind of people who would change one little thing. Lisa was in a hurry and decided that if she ignored the rules carefully, nothing would happen. And so even though the light was red, she dashed across the street. She won a minute there. She'll be on time. But it didn't work out. And to blame for everything was a thin, high heel of the new torpedo, which got stuck in the grate, literally half a meter from the sidewalk. Lisa started twitching her foot, then turned around at the shrill signal. Eyes widened as a huge black SUV sped straight toward her. She had time to think she could decipher the shoes and free herself. Also had time to think there was no time for that. I squeezed my eyes shut, having time to think one more thought, that it seemed that life should be all flashing before my eyes at such a moment, and she was being silly. And then there was a squeal of brakes. The SUV stopped lightly, poking the girl's blunt nose literally in her legs. Just a little more, and the irreparable happened. Lisa cautiously opened her eyes. "Are you sick of living?" And immediately met her gaze with the fury of the driver's eyes. "Oh," said the girl to herself. When the big man in a leather jacket loomed over her, he had powerful square jaws, but with Rybinskaya unreal blue eyes. Black hair, raised in a fashionable in the manner of the 60s hairstyle up. Stupid, sharp in the face, wearing the fresh copper breath. Lisa felt some strange thrills and goosebumps walk down her back at the proximity of that word. Exactly the Viking of the giant. Then suddenly recognition came. She'd only seen the man who'd broken her friend's life once. But it was that face that was memorized, and now it was right above her. Lisa acted as if on instinct. Her hand flew upward and clashed ringingly. The man pranced. She touched herself on the cheek, then looked down at her palm in surprise. Right there could show in ink the explanation of the deed, almost knocked down by him to the stranger. "Scoundrel," I shouted at him and wanted to come at him with my fists and with my handbag, but I forgot that I was stuck, aghast, and awkwardly began to fall. He picked me up. He held her, naturally, in his arms, so she forgot how to breathe. "Young lady, calm down. I'm sorry. Are you okay? Are you in pain?" "Yes, it's my fault. But let's not fight." She's read herself. "Why'd you run?" I was just a stream of words, and she looked with all her eyes and did not understand why it is so difficult to curse this monster on the spot. "Let me go," she whispered, and he gently let her go. Crouched down, grabbing her leg, I deftly turned Kova's leg, so that the heel slipped out of the bars. I had to lean on the man's shoulders to keep my balance. I hate you," I said coldly, as frozen by the word when he took the man for Margaret, but then suddenly grinned unkindly too. "For running the red light yourself, you fool. No, you're not. You ruined my friend's whole life." And Lisa, always so strong, who never went out of her way for a word, was suddenly torn. "You asshole. You're her. She had a baby girl. You're finished. We're gonna get you for what you did." And then she went on to say everything she thought. "Okay, stop. Shut up. You either ordered me to or you asked me to. I didn't do anything, Kelly, because my name is Rick, and you're talking about Mason. That's my brother." "What brother? You look just like him, don't you?" "Well, it's not my fault, we're twins." Lisa couldn't believe it. The man walked back to the car, came over, and held out his passport again. "See, I have a different name." Lisa stood frowning, trying to put this puzzle together. She remembered. Kelly had actually said that her boyfriend had a twin brother, only they didn't get along. "I'm sorry," sighed convulsively and wrapped her arms around herself. "I was wrong. Yeah, but it's been worse. A brother's legacy." The sky, meanwhile, had clouds somewhere waving in the sky and asphalt. Then the first drops. "All right, give me a minute. I'll park properly and we'll talk about it. There's a cafe over there," waving at the sign. "Will you tell me what happened there?" "'Cause I didn't get it." Lisa agreed. They went in, sat down at a table. They ordered a cup of this flavorful drink. But Lisa didn't even touch her cappuccino. She stared intently at the man across the table. Definitely not. Rick rolled his eyes. How else to prove it? "No, I'm not Mason. He is. He's dead." "What? The car accident 9 years ago?" "He was in China then and decided to race on the track for a bet." "If that's... well, that's the case. He was a real piece of work. But he was a brother." "So what happened?" "You said he had a kid." "Yes." Nodding, Lisa finally sipped her coffee and told the short story of how Kelly had fallen into a vicious affair, how she barely survived, and had decided to keep the baby at the cost of her own health. About how she was suffering now. Rick listened attentively, only occasionally asked short questions. "I don't know anything about it," he replied. And for some reason Lisa believed him. "I was in New York at the time, and I was still in school. Then I was told that Mason had gotten into some kind of trouble and had left the country. They said he'd given up everything. I came back 2 years after that. My father handed me the business. That's how she's been getting out all these years. I had a niece living in the neighborhood, and I didn't know it." So slammed his palm on the table. "So it was just fate that brought us together. I was supposed to leave for Italy tomorrow, but it turns out I'll have to stay late. Business can wait." Or she said no. "So, what are we gonna do?" I don't know," Lisa shrugged. "What do you mean you don't know?" "Well, you can't leave it like that. It's complicated." The girl already regretted her frankness. After all, this Rick, though he made a nice first impression, was still in the Singh family. And if even half of the rumors about them were true, they were clearly not people who could be trusted. Lisa suddenly thought about the fact that maybe it was not favorable for them to have a woman who had a child with such a person. In case they, Rick's relatives would take the whole story hostilely. Theoretically, if Kelly had a different temperament, she could try to get them to support her and her child, all be born out of wedlock. In fact, from what Lisa knew of the Smith family, they didn't give a damn about their personal reputations. But still, maybe it wasn't for nothing that her friend begged her to keep Miranda's origins a secret. What's the big deal? Rick smirked and leaned back in his chair. "We moved the child's mother to us, and that's it." "Where to us?" Lisa asked cautiously. "Well, home. They can't go on living unsupervised with Charles." Rick looked at her strangely. "It's like blood." "No. What are you talking about?" "Kelly's not a thing to be taken and transferred. She didn't want anyone to know about it at all, much less Smith," she added quietly. Now Cindy was beginning to think she had missed something in her perception of Rick. There was something dangerous about him, something that just made her instincts scream. "Run. I have to talk to her. Explain that I met you. Tell her you're offering to help, and that's the way it's going to be." Finished decisively and stopped in passing. The waiter slid in with a tray, asking for the bill. "My treat," threw carelessly Rick, and it didn't escape the girl that he was literally considering her without any shyness. "Thank you. But I'm so not used to the city," dropped her chin and left the bills for coffee, plus the waiter for tea. And for nothing. It's as if the man is deliberately provoking intimacy. A girl this pretty shouldn't. And this is where you're overstepping your bounds. Lisa nervously put on a jacket, tangled in the sleeves, sagged under the nose. "That's it. I'll call you when I'm going to go out." "Did you forget your phone?" Rick stopped her with a sneer, and there it was. I wanted to slap him again, but I had to go back and really exchange numbers. When the girl left, the lecturer looked thoughtfully out of the window for a few minutes. Then he dialed the number of the man who had repeatedly helped him out of the most difficult and sometimes risky situations. "Boris, are you free? You know, we have a problem." Lisa, of course, was late for class and had to cancel it altogether. And the students' parents said that in principle such a sluggish tutor could not teach anything worthwhile, and so they no longer needed Lisa's services. Before the next lesson, there was about 4 o'clock to eat, take a nap, and go home. Lisa had been chronically sleep-deprived the last few days. It was definitely not enough considering the traffic jams on the roads. So we had to pass the time at the mall. And then, when I circled it for the third time at the city library, where Lisa checked out the first book she could find, it turned out to be a novel. A paperback about a duke and an innocent waif. She opened it to find she didn't want to read it, and she plunged into her thoughts. What did she know about these Smiths? Nothing she'd deliberately learned about them. Well, she'd heard about them here and there. Seems they owned a few businesses in the area, and they were rich in the country, except that Jacob, the father of the family, was said to have made his fortune in the Nenides in a far from honest way. And Noah had raised his son alone. At least Noah had raised him abominably. Or so Lisa thought. Evil in a person can initially exist. No matter how you raise him, there was more. So it was known that Smith owned some business abroad. In Italy, the same Noah was involved in a dirty story, it seems, connected with smuggling something there. He shrugged. Lisa glanced at her watch. Well, it was time. We can go to the student. And for the nuances of electively punctuation marks, forget all about it. The next day, having gotten a moment when Charles wasn't home, he left for work. Lisa stopped by her friend's house, determined to have a conversation. The car, naturally, to protect children's ears from the serious subject, was sat down to watch cartoons, and to be safe, was provided with a bowl of cookies and a cup of cocoa. Kelly, as expected, took everything hard. It cost Lisa a lot of work to calm her friend down and tell her to hang in there. When it was revealed that her first love and abuser had died, Lisa told a small lie because she didn't believe it herself, and tried to convince her friend that if the man knew he had a daughter, he would surely repent and realize what a horrible person he was. Lisa said all this to bring the conversation to the next topic, the offered help from Rick. At first, Kelly had desperately rejected her and didn't need anything. Lisa had to be cruel and say straight up, well, what don't you need? Health to be. Stop it all, I can't do this to you anymore. You're Charles. He's not a husband. He's just as nasty as Mason. No, don't say that. It was Kelly first. But Lisa just handed her the phone and showed her the secretly recorded tape. Then she hugged her tightly and looked into her eyes and told her to hold on, because she couldn't do otherwise, and she couldn't act inconsiderately either. It was therefore in no way possible to tell Charles that his evil plans were already known to everyone. The wise thing to do would be to lay low, to see what use could be made of Smith. Yes, it is Mason who has ruined your life, but my opinion will not change. Help should and can be accepted at least as compensation, including moral compensation. It just so happens, girlfriend, that you have to choose between two evils. Think about your daughter. You'll get back on your feet. No one is forcing you to be friends with these wolves. Lisa smiled slyly. I'm just taking advantage of the help. And then goodbye. You'll live independently with your daughter without any idiots. That was the end of their decision. Going out to her friend's house, Lisa, taking advantage of the fact that it was a day off, went to the beauty salon still a week ago signed up, decided to change the brown in hair color, and hair by a fashionable coloring called California Appellation, with which hair seemed as if in the burnt sun, but looked beautiful. On the way, Rick called, saying they needed to meet and talk. It was agreed that he would drive up to the park. The weather was beautiful. We could talk there too. It looks good on you. So, first, said Rick, when she got to the appointed time and answered and thought she really shouldn't care what this guy thought about her altered style. They'd walked the field of the park, And Lisa relayed, naturally, only partially the outcome of her conversation with her friend. Rick said that it was not a problem to find the money, and moreover that doctors could get it here even abroad. You don't have to go far, Lisa said. He shrugged. And then the topic turned to her own person, strangely unnoticed. Cindy told him who she was, what she did for a living. Cindy realized that this was not the point of the conversation. She was embarrassed, angry at Rick because he'd started it first. Lisa, hello. It was James' voice, the groom, chosen unanimously by all the family except the bride. He had crept up unnoticed, literally ducked out from behind the bushes, and now looked confused. Somehow he reminded me of Owl, good-natured, and a little clumsy. Who's that acquaintance of yours? Name's Rick, and this is James. He's a friend of mine, she answered, but averted her gaze because she couldn't bring herself to say it. As everyone said, her fiancé can't reach you, gently rebuked James. My mom is asking for you. Hi to her. Lisa bent over, picking a gray dandelion off the ground. Why aren't you getting a haircut? Mom always said hair is long. It's your jewelry. You know it's my hair, and I do what I want with it. What about you? Did you go outside with your mom? I asked permission to go for a walk. She was being snide. I'm sick of it. It's all about your mom. Everything has an opinion. I'm done. She tossed the dandelion to the ground and pushed it on top of him. Rick, on the other hand, completely unashamed, smirked, almost insulted. Yeah, boy run. Who are you anyway? James, I've never seen Lisa so annoyed before. Why are you even bothering with the bride? What about the bride? Rick and bent over, struggling, and suddenly caught Lisa's hand up to her lips and kissed her gallantly, but with a frank and predatory look in his eyes. Accept my congratulations. Lisa was at first dumbfounded. Goosebumps danced down her back. Then her cheeks flared up, and she practically shouted, I have not yet answered whether I agree, and leave me alone. Both turned and ran out of the park. Lisa, James followed, but Rick stopped him by the shoulder. Caught, she wants to be alone. Don't you get it? You've never been in a fight in your life, James, but now you want to. He didn't like this familiarity with Lisa that he hadn't seen before. He didn't like the way he kissed the girl's hand, and the way she looked at him. He felt kind of uneasy and uncomfortable in general. Stay away from her, Kino, as menacingly as possible, and walked out of the park as well. Rick grinned. Just the last thing he wasn't going to do by any means. Lisa was very interesting to him, and now not just as the girlfriend of his big, sudden problem. However, he did not doubt that this problem was solvable, because so far, whatever happened to the Smith family in the end, in one way or another, with greater or lesser losses, and not at all on their part, but everything was solved. Literally, the next day Rick showed up at Kelly's house. Again, they decided together that the most favorable contact, so to speak, was to begin. If Charles would not be around, and so it turned out, he was at work. Rick came with a bouquet of flowers, but after their meeting, Kelly asked Lisa to take Lisa with her, because how could she explain their appearance to Charles? Kelly had wanted to cancel the meeting the day before, to give up everything altogether and not understand how, but to deal with everything on her own. But the case was such that it became clear without the suddenly appeared, like an oasis in front of the wandering in the desert support Rick cannot do without. The thing was, Charles came home drunk. He said he had been reprimanded at work and might be fired altogether. Kelly asked her husband to stay put as best he could. After all, the end of summer was coming and Miranda had to go to school, and nothing had been packed or bought for her yet. But Charles angrily replied that he's the man of the family and he'll decide everything himself. He added the kids are so spoiled nowadays that they can still buy notebooks. All the uniforms, a new backpack is a pampering and a fool's errand. Then he said it quietly, apparently thinking he wouldn't hear. His wife added that he was tired of raising someone else's girl, but he didn't stop there. In the evening, Miranda asked if he would buy yogurt for her. Charles yelled at the girl that they would put her on bread and water, and then she would know how to appreciate a piece and stop whining. That's why Rick Kelly was fishing out of greed. First, I made arrangements with a local clinic. There are some very good specialists here in town. They work miracles, by the way. Well, if you don't mind, you can come in tomorrow for a checkup. Kelly was so quick to marvel. Well, money opens different doors, Rick shrugged. But I need to talk to Sophia. She's our neighbor. She looks after Miranda sometimes. Lisa nodded. I'd look out for tomorrow myself. I have 2 classes. An option, of course, but I can offer babysitting services. No, come on, what are you? That's too much. Kelly objected. And then it's a stranger. And the neighbor, do you know her well? But that's different, Kelly replied. She realized that in her situation such an unexpected care and warning from Rick was a real rescue. But on the other hand, she was uncomfortable taking all this help in an unsettling way. When Rick left, Kelly talked to her friend some more and enlisted her support in breaking the news to Charles. And we decided, by the way, to say that it wasn't a very distant acquaintance who was helping. We moved the conversation to the next day in the morning, because then we have to go to work again. And if we talked in the evening, he would have plenty of time to object, express his opinion, or even make a scandal. Fortunately, Charles only listened and did not even say anything. He waved his hand at the useless, in his opinion, the idea of treatment, and went to work. There again, there was a shortage of goods, and the bosses were looking for someone to blame. The examination took a long time. Kelly thought that she would have to wait several days for answers, but to her surprise, the head doctor of the clinic immediately gave his prognosis that restoration of normal body condition was possible if treatment was started soon. Do not worry about the operation, assured the patient. We have everything to conduct it at the level of the best clinics in America and Europe. Now we need to do some additional tests, and we can set a date. I think, taking into account everything plus the rehabilitation period, by the new year, you will already be able to try to make your first step. Really? Kelly marveled. Tears came to her eyes. When did she ever imagine she could be healthy? Going for walks with her daughter. Then one day, as she dreamed, even go to the sea with her and splash on the waves. She immediately pulled herself together. The sea is far away. The main thing is just to get healthy. Lisa's thoughts in the last few days were occupied with the fate of her friend. There was almost no time for herself. However, it did not care much. Everything in the girl's life had long been subordinated to the usual routine. Classes with students, a little fitness, watching her favorite TV series, plus revision and above, and also household chores. What kind of personal life is there? Even if the relatives seem intent on getting you married as soon as possible. AP, are men in short supply? Lisa asked, carefully, without rushing. Are you molding another jam and cottage cheese? On the day of their big molding, the family gathered at the table and did not do without the topic that unnerves Lisa. No, of course not. It's just that, Mom, and I think James would be a good husband for you. And what I think is of any interest to anyone at all. I'm not arguing. James is a great guy and really would only make a good husband for someone else, I guess. Why? Why don't you like him? Lisa's mom backed up her dad. Well, there's just no spark, the girl answered honestly. Bah, granddaughter shook her grandmother's head. A spark is dangerous. It happens, but how can a fire happen? Lisa froze, noticed that the dress wet hibernation board and dumplings to mold. And about the groom to talk about everything. I've had enough of half-finished products, said, getting up and growing palms. I'm gonna go see Kelly. Will you do something with her? A grown married woman. Mom was outraged. Age and marital status are no barrier to friendship, shouted Lisa, already out of the bath. To wash her hands was the way to go. But in reality, Lisa didn't go to her friend's house, but to a completely different address. And she decided to do it without warning, because she wanted to see in person and find out where her friend was theoretically going to live. The fact that it would be better to move out of the house where the husband aggressively cheats under the nose of his wife and is up to no good was no longer in doubt. "Let me in to see Rick Smith. Can you tell me Lisa's name?" Businesslike reported into the intercom outside the mansion, located in a picturesque, ecologically clean neighborhood of the city. But I guessed right. The gate was opened by a guard who was very suitable to play bulldogs in the play because he was very solid and scowling with an expression on his face. After greeting the unexpected guest, the guard led her to the house. Lisa noted approvingly the small manicured garden outside and the stylishly, but not insanely golden, as in the homes of some rich people, as she'd seen on the shows, the furnishings inside. "Hello." Suddenly a melodious girlish voice sounded and a pretty blonde girl of about 20 years old came out into the hallway to Cindy and the guard. She was dressed in a scarlet mini dress. "Hello," Lisa answered and wondered who it was. Rick had said that her father and his second wife were the same age. We maid was not a good-looking woman either, so there's only one possibility. It's Rick's girlfriend. Well, that's expected. "So Lisa, no one talks about you in this, Kelly. I'm glad you came. I was thinking of coming to you guys for the blonde's territory." "Why would you come?" "To meet a relative and her best friend." "Too naive for Rick's girlfriend," the blonde replied. "Oh, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Clara Lyam," she addressed the guard. "You're free to go," and turned to the guests again. "Come on, Rick in the backyard." Cindy, the blonde, didn't like the overly colorful name. "What a lovely name, too." Thought she'd gone. "What I was wearing to make dumplings. And now, as it is uncomfortable for knitwear on the dress, sweater with stretched into shorts, and it's all for nothing. And what she honest person to be embarrassed in the company of these measures to think she did not have time. Because, having passed through several rooms, she went out to the backyard and found herself in a small cozy garden, in the center of which in a small corral stood a horse of fantastic golden color. And beside him on his knees Rick, he was examining the animal's leg and speaking to it affectionately. "I didn't think these ILs could be like that." He rebelled repeatedly. "That's it. It won't hurt now. You'll stand quietly. Almost everything is already animal doctor." The blonde in red called out to him and waved his hand. "You've got a visitor here, actually." Rick stood up. He looked imposing. It was the first time Lisa had seen him without his jacket. For the warm weather, the man in jeans wore a simple black t-shirt, emphasizing all the muscles of his torso and arms. "Hi." He smiled at Lisa and said, "Not expected, but glad. What are you doing here?" "Yes, here is thinking about the proposal to change the place of residence and wanted to see what you can offer my friend," she answered. "It is important." And the same thing became as mixed. "Here are a dozen more of these options to choose from. So that's great." Clara clapped his hands. "Don't doubt it. My brother will take care of your friend and me. Anyway, it's all terrible." I sighed. "You've got to move on. Kelly and daughter certainly deserve the best." "Brother?" Lisa gasped. "You're his sister." "Yeah. What did you think? He just didn't say he had a sister. But just a sister. That's my brother, the one who's a bun and sings the female gender. So I'm going to go carefully. I've got things to do." She winked at Lisa. "So you are not only a millionaire, a businessman, a sportsman, but you also deal with horses?" asked Lisa, looking around at everything but the man's definitions. "I'm not an athlete, just good genetics," replied Rick, and pulled out of his jeans pocket apple split in half. One part he handed to the girl. "You can treat it once. She loves it." "Well, if so," taking the juicy fruit, stretched out carefully, in the palm of her hand, and awed when the horse picked up the treat with soft, velvet lips. What had happened to her? She hit a piece of iron sticking out of the ground. "It was my fault. I should have been more careful where I was going. But she's fine now. Actually, she's an old lady, but as you can see, she's in good shape. My first and only horse." He stroked the animal's neck. My father told my brother and me that there are two gifts for New Year's Eve, a horse and a car. Mason chose the second one. I got one, and then their fingers met on silkwood, and it felt like a tiny bolt of lightning struck. Lisa took her hand away and stared down at the toes of her shoes in embarrassment. I actually came here to talk about Kelly. Since you're offering your patronage, it seems silly to turn it down. You don't think Kelly's stupid at all. It's just everything that's happened. Everything that's happened in the last few years, it's really affected her. And I don't want to. I can't let her make the wrong decision because of me. I understand. So you're sort of her representative. All right, Mr. Representative. Ask questions, make terms, we'll negotiate. It was said lightly, jokingly even. But Lisa knew the conversation was going to be serious. Kelly had come to terms with her position over the years. And if in nature there were some stages, which, according to the theory of many psychologists, a person who got into a difficult, nightmarish life situation should go through, she had overcome them in a flash, quickly, being on humility. It wasn't the kind of resignation that seemed to make the world seem black and white, and you didn't care about anything or anyone. Kelly simply decided to let go of the past, not to let it bother her anymore, and to focus on the only and truly important thing, the baby. It was her daughter that was the motivation to get her health back and work harder. It was Miranda who kept the discouragement at bay. True, now it was also necessary to recognize names in great and better motives. Kelly had made many mistakes, and chief among them was her marriage to Charles. Now, after a long time, she realized that she married him out of desperation, because it seemed, well, who else needs her? Orphanage without education of the highest with a child in her arms, and even sick. So she took Charles as a savior, and all his shortcomings from stinginess to neglect, sometimes even contemptuous rudeness to himself, passed by. I thought if it wasn't too bad, it would do. It won't get any worse. But it turned out it could be worse. And now Kelly was just scared. For her daughter. And a little bit for herself. But that fear had only possessed her in the past few days. And now, when a man appeared in her life, outwardly a point of support, a copy of the one who ruined her life in character and intentions, it seems his exact opposite. Now the fear has receded. It was replaced by hope that there is justice in the world. No, Kelly did not expect any fantastic gifts from fate for what she had suffered in the past, but she was timidly hoping that things would just work out so that she could be a healthy mom to her daughter, that they could make a life for themselves. A peace in the world. Kelly thought that apparently the white streak had begun when Lisa came to her and told her about being at the Smith house, talked to Rick about everything. Also met his sister, and she seems like a really nice girl. Kelly, however, remembering how Charles had argued again in the morning, that with the needs of an invalid's wife, you'd have to spend your whole life on medication. I agreed that it was better for her to move out. So we're packing. I'll call Rick and have him pick it up. So Charles is already at work until tonight, right? Lisa was a little confused that they weren't moving out, but rather running away. But it was the only option, since she didn't want any scandal at all. And how adequate is Charles? I didn't want to find out in practice. Where are we going? Miranda asked, excitedly, watching Aunt Lisa hurriedly putting all her small belongings into a travel bag. The girl stood nearby, hugging a plush white snow bear with a pink bow around its neck. It had been a gift from Rick, to visit Mommy's friends. Explain to Lisa what would basically even be true. Why won't he come with us? Gingerly asked the girl, and in front of her eyes just blossomed when she found out that he wasn't. There are horses there, Lisa said. Rick will probably let you ride it. They even have a garden with flowers. How am I gonna get to school? I only know how to cross one street. Suddenly I remembered the girl's upcoming schooling. They'll probably drive you by car, or you'll just go to another school. We'll think of something. You'll need all the toys for sure. Asked Lisa with a doomed, wistful network, looking at the shelves, filled with all sorts of stuff, and even in the drawer of toys was piled. Much needed and books needed. and the lamp poked the marketeer with its finger. "Rick of the month. It's all clear with you," sighed Miranda. Lisa shook her head and went to find some boxes to pack it all properly. Charles had no intuition. It just happened to be that day, and got off work early. "Where do you think you're going?" He realized his wife wasn't going to the clinic with her daughter, and so much stuff. But what pissed Charles off the most was that Kelly was being held in his arms by some stranger. I don't care if the wife was singing about people she knew, but that's not the point. It's a stranger being held by some stranger. It wouldn't even be jealousy anymore. It would be creative anger. "Charles, I need treatment." It was uncomfortable to speak in that position. Kelly thought that her crutches had already been put away in the parlor. In fact, Rick was going to put her there. But Charles, what a bad time to show up. It would have been better if they'd just explained everything to him on the phone. "I'll stay at a friend's house for a while. It'll be better for you. I won't trouble Galia, so I'm working." What did she think? Confused with him, already calmed down. "Your wife is in good hands," said Rick, and he sent a smile that made her even angrier. But he also gave me the look that said to stay out of it. It's dangerous. There were a few neighbors nearby, and they were naturally interested in what was going on. "Come on, you guys, calm down. Lisa Kelly is an adult and can decide where she wants to live. Where's the baby going? I'm not letting my daughter in." Clinging to the possibility of control. "Charles, and you adopted her?" Rick suddenly asked. "Who are you?" I choked with indignation. "Charles, I ask you again, did you adopt the girl?" "No, but there's no need to get involved." Your voice is clearly not decisive with a smirk. Rick is as easy as the market and careful to knit porcelain. Set Kelly up in the auto shop, especially after the fact that on the apartment of his wife opened his mouth and mistress's floors below, said Charles added. And without saying anything else, he got into the driver's seat. Lisa and Miranda were already in the cabin, the former in the front passenger seat, the latter next to her mother in the back. The neighbors had heard everything, and now they were so friendly they were rolling over on Charles. He's very brave. He suddenly felt more humiliated and insulted than ever before. "You shouldn't have said that," Lisa said. "You have to put them in their place, otherwise they become greyhounds," Rick replied. "But he's my husband," said Kelly. "We have to call him right away." "What about me? What have you done?" She continued indignantly. "I'm sorry, it's none of your business. Miranda belongs to our K. Smith family, which means her family. And especially whatever happens to her mother is our business." Calmly, but in a matter-of-fact voice, Rick said, "Did you make the right decision in agreeing to your husband moving in? I admit that this man may have positive qualities, but I admit it is purely out of respect for you. But he's clearly not the best company. Now, when you need to get back on your feet." Upon arriving at the mansion, Rick let Kelly take a few steps on her own. But then, seeing how hard it was for her, he told her to conserve her strength and picked her up in his arms again. Lisa walked from the summer, Miranda with her tail on her. She greeted the new arrivals with a brightly colored welcome home banner in the hallway and tossed confetti in the air. Lisa thought it was too much, but Kelly, which rarely happened to her, smiled, and the familiarity of Rick's sister in general was clearly something she enjoyed. The luggage from the car was immediately taken up by one man, Timer, who was introduced as someone like a butler and someone to go to for anything. It also turned out that there was a scary maid Tatiana in the house. The two youngest are Christina and Kathy. There are 3 rooms prepared for Kelly. 1 bedroom for her, a second for Miranda, and an even larger room on the semblance of a hall. And they were all adjoining. "Whatever you need, just say the servants are warned that you are our queen," smiled Rick as he lowered Kelly onto the couch in the living room. "Thank you." Embarrassed, she replied back. "I'll try not to give him too much trouble. Since when did caring become that name? How about we switch to you?" And getting consent, he continued, "I just want to make your stay and Miranda's too most comfortable. And my father agrees with me completely." "Lisa, does Uncle Rick have a wife?" Asked a question out of the blue, Miranda asked, when Lisa took the girl from the living room to show her room. Here, by the way, was there anything to be surprised about? Everything was decorated in white sky blue and pink colors. The crib was not simple, but in the form of a carriage with golden wheels, with a transparent floor and funny plush unicorn. God! Miranda, as she saw all this splendor, lived to squeal with a squeal of amazement, lost the gift of speech. And then she asked this weird question. Well, I guess not. Why are you asking a little girl? Just like that, the girl answered and ran off to look at the room. In general, it would be possible to praise Rick, of course, for being so prepared for the arrival of the little girl. But on the other hand, it was too much of a fortune to spend, and all for the reason that you were blazing with kindred feelings for your suddenly acquired kinsman. It seemed strange to Lisa. Not that she didn't believe in people's kindness, but it was alarming. Finally, when she helped her friend get settled in her new place and questioned her in detail about everything about the treatment she had planned for the near future, Lisa was able to leave the Smith home to return to her own place. She had a lot of classes waiting for her with her students. She also had to figure something out with James. The phone was ringing off the hook with his phone calls. When Kelly woke up the next morning, she didn't immediately realize where she was. And when she remembered, she lay there for a few minutes just watching the sunbeam on the wall as it froze and took in the new and amazingly prosperous reality. It was hard to believe that now she had been given the opportunity to live in comfort, to be cared for. Rick had been given the opportunity to choose a few professional dialogue, that society that would be most suitable, and Kelly. Oh, it was a difficult choice, and in general it was kind of timid to use everything that this person was ready to give. But one could not say that about Miranda. My daughter was delighted with her new life. She liked that Rick really let her ride the horse. Naturally, the step he led the mare under the reins, and liked the room where she felt like a little princess, and the fact that you could get at least pancakes, soft cream waffles, or cheesecakes for breakfast. You're spoiling her for me. Kelly shook her head. She and Rick were sitting in the garden. He had suggested tea on such a warm and bright day outdoors. On the table, in addition to everything for tea, there were also papers from the clinic. One had to familiarize oneself with the proposed treatment package. I think we agreed on you, smiled Rick. He looked at the young woman so intently that she was embarrassed. Yes, of course, she'll be so amused. Is it the least I can do? But you don't have to. You're wrong. You know, I just believe in fate, that many things in our lives happen for a reason. And so far, that belief hasn't failed me, Kelly, unexpectedly. So, Nolan took her hand. Yeah, he's touched her before. And that's when you have her in your arms. But it was different now. I will do anything to earn your trust and forgiveness for what my brother did. You're not responsible for him. I opened my eyes and was struck by how strangely my own heart froze for a moment. Such an amazing feeling that hadn't happened in a long time. It had never been with Charles, and I wanted it to happen again. But then there's the scarecrow. I'm glad you can see me as a different person. And yet we're family, and I want to be there for you when you take your first steps, when you're healthy. Kelly smiled and turned away, pretending to regard the late cello picking nectar from the purple rose. The next few weeks merged into one unbearably long time, because agonizing despite all the doctor's favorable prognosis. The unknown. Kelly, although she wished more than anything to become healthy, was very tired of examinations gathered on uncomplicated terms. I was worried that she'd have to bear all these changes for her daughter. Wouldn't she be worse off in her new home? No, it was impossible to complain about the way they were treated. They seemed to accept their arrival. There was Rick, his sister, and the servants. It's strange having servants at all. They seemed to take it naturally, as if it was meant to be. But still, now Miranda was in an unfamiliar environment and couldn't even play with her old friends. And of course, Kelly thought about what it would be like when it was over. After all, it was impossible that fate smiled so much, that once and for all. And that meant that she would probably have to get better and go back to her usual life. It will be possible to divorce Charles, and there was no doubt about it. It's gonna be long and hard. As for Rick's sister, she turned out just fine. And as shameful as it was to admit it, it was kind of a pushover. Kelly Slaga became a friend. They became close, especially since Kelly was fascinated by what Slaga was doing. In general, my dad wanted me to become a lawyer and not a fashion designer, the girl shared. On this cloudy day, Kelly was at her room, which is actually Led, who decided creative mess, more like a creative studio. The subject matter, however, was matter of fact. Clara was twirling around a mannequin with a crackle of fabric, figuring out, as it were, in whose zeal to copy the material on the dress. Kelly sat next to her in the gurney chair she trusted. It doesn't take long to get used to it. But I'm stubborn. I said I'd run away from home if I didn't, according to me, continued the girl. At this, Kelly shook her head boldly. She personally could not imagine how it is so generally possible to communicate with relatives, if in general you have a good relationship with them. She herself had always dreamed of having a family. Kelly pored over the sketches. It turns out that in half a year, the educated woman was to have a show in Rome. Not yet, of course, as part of the World Fashion Week, but it was already happening. According to Slaga's assurances, it was a start. I wanted to be a designer too. You did. Wow. Tell me why you didn't. I had to make a living, Kelly shrugged. And then she realized how ugly it was to insinuate that someone was rich. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I just didn't get a chance. Yeah, that's okay. We're in the middle of something. Maybe it's time to fulfill a dream. I don't get it. Kelly, looking at a few more sketches, here they were ruthlessly crossed out, and it seems were variations of what now no longer on paper, but in person tried to create a young fashion designer. Well, you can start learning now, answered so simply, as if the opportunity for this already lay. Ready only here is a hand outstretch. Understand, you probably have a talent, and that's a grain of happiness to miss out on in life. And if you don't do what you like, courage. She spoke beautifully, but of course, was cosmically far from the truth. After all, many, very many people are forced to do what they do not like, just to earn for themselves and their relatives. Here, by the way, let's right now, the girl smiled and clapped her hands with her idea. I can, clarified Kelly, and when she nodded, in response drove her closer to the mannequin itself. I can't think of what to do. Right there, and she poked her finger at the mannequin's waistline and lower down the hip line. There has to be training here. I've tried 1,000 variations. It's all wrong. Here you go. She handed Kelly the pearl-headed pins. At first I wanted to refuse food. What does she know about it? But then I bit my lip and thought about it. Determined to get to work. Why not try it? For fun in the process did not interfere, silently watched. Ready, Kelly finally said. And as you can see, it worked. What she meant to say was that it turned out terribly. What else would you expect from an amateur? But then Clara showered her with compliments that it was original, fresh, and airy. And at the same time, the lines, as the fabric lay, turned out to be strict, perfectly capturing the essence of the mood of the flesh. She photographed the dress, went around it, shooting video, making it. This flew to Rome. What do you mean? It flew to Rome. Kelly Margaret, I sent to my teacher. The girl shrugged and gave me the name of a very famous designer. That it was the same one I did. I asked him for an answer. Does my friend have talent? Or should she look for another calling in life? But Kelly didn't understand how that was even possible, which is what she was doing. By the way, the fact that you learned to be a designer seamstress is a very good thing, because you understand the process of making clothes from the inside. Kelly didn't think about it in that way and only had to shake her head. Next, we talked not only about fashion, but also about the near future. Kelly noticed that her new friend had a very unusual, beautiful name, and she replied that it was just her mom, Rick's father's second wife, whom he took when the first one died of cancer, originally from Italy. That's where the name came from. And then it turned out that the day came very quickly when Kelly was to have surgery. The young woman was naturally worried and fell asleep under anesthesia. She was more sure that she was hopeless than the doctor said. But when she woke up, it turned out that the intervention was successful. And then, in the following days, it became clear that everything was even better than the doctors had originally planned. Kelly was on the mend. Of course, there was still a long rehabilitation process ahead. But still, the main thing was accomplished. Charles, by the way, during all this time with his wife practically did not communicate. He and Kelly called literally a couple times. "How's it going?" He didn't ask about her health. He only asked about Miranda because he'd been traveling so much for advice. Turns out he's doing just fine living away from his wife. And as Lisa relayed, he's not even sad. Unfortunately, he's been communicating more and more openly with that redhead from the first floor. Kelly, when she found out, didn't feel anything. But in the sense that she realized that her marriage to Charles had been built on a desperate desire to have a reliable, caring man around. It hadn't worked out that way. As fate had shown, love definitely never happened. She just didn't have the guts to admit it before, because she just didn't see any alternative to living alone. But now everything was changing, and Kelly felt more and more free. Lisa, in the time since Kelly had moved into the Smith house, had lived as she had before. Classes with students small their own joys. James, fortunately, as if to realize that marriage is not a joke matter, and it takes a lot of time to make that decision. But once discontent expressed, repeating the words of his mother that youth passes and that to create a family, it is better to think early. You twisted it like that. Lisa at the temple with her finger, rushing a girl into a relationship by insinuating that the girl is getting old. "You know, honey, I'm going to think 100 more times after this that your candidacy with your mom on top of it is not the best option." James, blushing like a cancer. He apologized and even brought a bouquet of yellow roses. And yellow roses mean separation. "I've heard of that," Lisa grumbled, but she took the bouquet. James was upset. "I've known you too long, since the sandbox to be exact. Let's make a deal. If you're really counting on something serious, then just give me the time not to squeeze my soul out, or the friendship we've had these years will start to, excuse me, disappear." James was in agreement. He agreed to everything now. But he was also determined that he would not back down. Because on the eve of the action you yourself brought, went to visit Cindy, and in the girl's room, the door was not very open. On the table noticed a bouquet of flowers, something lush like orchids. James didn't know about it, and he got suspicious, because there were no holidays at his beloved's house. So someone must have given them to her. Who? Wasn't it the rich man who took care of her friend? James wasn't afraid to lose, because it wouldn't mean anything to go against a man Lisa had known since childhood. But it still didn't feel right. He wanted Lisa to wear a wedding ring, as a married woman, and behave accordingly. Lisa herself was busy with something more important than thinking about whether it was time to get married. In the first place, she was watching her friend, and it seemed to her that Kelly might be a victim of something she couldn't quite understand. But it turned out that the wolf's interest was not simple, all this care. And on top of that, Lisa was a little jealous of her friend Clara. Up until now, in fact, she was the only one Lisa had been close friends with Kelly, and the appearance of a new character in the little company was unsettling. And even more so, she didn't want Kelly to fall under any bad influence. One day Lisa was rushing to class with that very student, a student whose parents had rejected her for being late, but had changed their minds. Lisa was triumphant. She was better than that. She hurried through the city, thinking that she should definitely stop by Kelly's to see how she was recovering from surgery. And suddenly, passing by the summer veranda, almost all in the city clothes they are already on it remained hidden, stretched instead of the walls of the canvas of coffee color. She heard a familiar voice. Rick was talking to someone, and Kelly's name sounded. The girl stopped on this side of the end adjacent to the building's summer veranda. There were hardly any passersby, but judging by the sounds, the talkers were sitting at the nearest table, Are the papers ready? Don't worry, a sample contract. I'll send you out tomorrow. What are our people saying? Well, it's a tricky situation, but I think we should take control of the main thing. From what I've heard, then it became clear that Rick met with his lawyer, and they talked about the fact that, it turns out, Miranda is not just Mason's daughter, but also his heir by law. Since Mason had gotten ownership of a not insignificant share of the family business from her father, it seemed to be about a lot of money. But the real shocker was something else. It turned out that Rick was concerned that Kelly, as the daughter's representative, could take over the business. He had no intention of letting that happen, and his plan was such that Lisa became furious and finally stopped respecting the man altogether. A real monster in the guise of a man, whom she had already as stupid as dollars. This man was already starting to. She liked, and those flowers he sent made her heart tingle. Hearing enough, and fearing that I here will find the exit from the summer veranda was literally a meter away from where Lisa was lurking, and she decided to leave, and realized, by the way, that she was late again. Again, she sighed, stopped, dialed the number of the student's parents, and not wanting to listen to compliments, told herself she wasn't coming. Circumstances forced it. They'd promised to leave a negative review on all resources. Lisa, with the phone on the ground, did not throw. Here, and that's Rick's fault, too, by the way. I got distracted by my conspiracy. How much did she hate him at that moment? But she got a grip. She had to talk to Kelly soon. Only it was only coming out that it could only be done later, because there was a new class in 3 o'clock, and to let herself lose this student. Lisa couldn't at all. Then Grandma Lisa's mom called. Lisa was not feeling well. Her heart was not up to the ambulance, but naturally the girl hurried home. And so it turned out that it was possible to get to the friend only the next day. And of course, I wanted to talk about everything on the phone. Lisa, I wanted to call you myself and demand that you come. My friend was in surprisingly good spirits, and somehow it seemed to Cindy that it wasn't just about her getting better. It's been an amazing day. Can you believe Miranda said she likes math? Rick suggested a really good tutor. Turns out Miranda's aptitude just needed a different approach. Lisa was in agreement with this until she started tutoring the girl in Russian. She never got higher than a B. Apparently, Miranda belonged to those kids who need a special way of presenting a topic that is difficult to learn. And they're already better will go. The girl would certainly be pleased with the success of a young student. We were about to have a serious conversation on a completely different topic, after which perhaps only now, as emotions had subsided, Lisa thought about the fact that by telling everything to Kelly could cross her all so prosperous present. But it was impossible to keep quiet about it, because then she would be in great danger, and Miranda would be in danger too. Lisa had already taken a breath of air into her chest to start throwing herself into the thick of it. Here, they were suddenly interrupted. Clara burst into the room as a positive hurricane. Dad's here with a surprise. Just now he called. He's on his way. Yay. Smiling brightly, she jumped up to Kelly and took her hand. You need to get changed right away, she nodded, hinting at the house dress, a funny drawing of a mouse. Lisa was a little in shock. The situation was compounding into a disaster already, turning right before her eyes. She had time to learn that Jacob Smith was, in fact, the real master of the entire family business empire. It was he, not Rick, who made the key decisions, which meant Lisa realized she had to act decisively. Where are you going? Ockled her as she hurried to the door. Kelly, I need to ask Rick something urgent. She dropped what she had in mind. Now she could only hope they were rich people who had no conscience or decency left, would listen to her, and if they didn't, Lisa hadn't decided what to do in that case. But she had no doubt that she wouldn't let her friend get hurt. After all, the operation had already been done, and successfully. So Kelly would be less dependent on this family. Damn it. Where's Rick? The maid caught her in the hallway. He's in the study. But Jacob ordered, not listening to anyone, rushed further into the study, flew into it without knocking, without invitation. the dare of a puppy. The tall, gray-haired man slapped the man standing in front of him, Rick, with a hard swing. Lisa froze and stepped over the threshold. Ouch. Immediately it was clear the scene was clearly not for strangers' eyes. The men turned to her in sync. The one who was apparently Jacob, the head of the family, looked unhappy to have interrupted a thorough conversation with a guilty son. Rick, confused, they could see that they were very uncomfortable to be seen in this light. "I told you not to bother. Who the hell are you?" Coolly threw the man. Lisa girl at first wanted to apologize and go out, but realized that this man, his weakness immediately smells, and therefore with him to deal with. How scary, as if the wolf took human form and is now looking into the soul, thinking about attack or wait. "I'm Kelly's friend," she clarified, and stepped boldly forward. "I know everything. I know what you're up to." That's how the role of the older man bent. He grinned. How interesting. Interesting. Lisa, who was no longer afraid at all, erupted. And she said everything she thought about Rick and Rick's sinister plan. And then something began to dawn on her. She suddenly, as she considered the emotions, Rick's father's anger, confusion, and vulnerability. And she even thought that if you began to be a gray-haired man gesturing for silence. Lawyers, thankfully, work for me, not him. And then last night I got the curious news that my own son had decided to follow in his brother's footsteps. Rick, tell me, did you think I wouldn't find out anything at all seriously? Like I didn't know you were coming? Yeah, your accounts are kind of on lockdown, by the way. What did I explain? Well, try me, but later. In the meantime, I must apologize to this lovely girl. He turned to Cindy again. I'm sorry the case was delayed. I should have dropped it and come down here. Once I found out I had a granddaughter. Why don't you sit down? We need to have a serious talk. Cindy was beginning to think that everything that was happening was not real, that she had become the heroine of a movie, a drama, and a thriller. The questions were finally answered. Lisa's panic and fear for her friend was justified. It turned out that Rick was planning to fall in love with Kelly and marry her, as well as adopt Miranda. Thus, he would have full power over the little girl heir to his brother's fortune. And what's more, Jacob Smith stated in almost direct text that his son had no intention of treating Kelly well and with care. Apparently, he wanted her on a purely formal basis. Dad, but I wouldn't. Rick started to start, but his father gave him a look that made him hesitate and shut up. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have interrupted. You're not supposed to breathe without my permission now. I'm sure you'd make the poor girl's life a living hell. After everything your brother's done. Does that sound like atonement for his sins? I'm afraid I was wrong. You and he are too much alike. It's been decided. I'll transfer the shares to Clara. What can't you do? She refused to enter the family business. But she's always been honest. Technically, she can hold the second largest stake after mine. I can't really trust you with it. Look, this is all very important, but it's for you to try and get Lisa's attention back. What about Kelly? You realize she can't now. What are you talking about? The girl. Formally, but somehow it sounded not rude, not dismissive, more trusting, patronizing. Addressed her Jacob. Do you really want your friend to go back to her old life in a poor apartment where that man is waiting for her? I don't believe in fate. I just know that I have a granddaughter and I don't intend to leave her to her fate. Yes, she's the heir to a great fortune. It just so happens. Technically, everything Mason owned went to me as his father, but Miranda is entitled to it, and always has been. And I intend to make sure the girl takes advantage of every opportunity that comes her way. She's not only your friend's daughter, she's my own blood. But Lisa began, but faded under the strange look in Korea's eyes. What Rick was up to must not be known to anyone. Kelly, there is no need to know. Let her life be more peaceful after everything. I agree. I'm bringing her up to speed myself, personally making sure that no one and nothing is threatened now. And then Lisa asked the question that had plagued her ever since she learned that Rick was plotting a mercantile marriage to her best friend. "Why did you send me flowers? Why did you act like you liked me?" "Lisa, look, I know what I did was selfish, mean. So can we talk in private?" "No, you talk here. I've had enough of your secrets. Besides, I'm really interested to hear about your adventures, you know." Father Rick clearly enjoyed the helpless submission of a son who depended on him for everything. He'd been brought up so that rebellion, though it happened, was quelled quickly. Cindy felt even a little sorry for Rick. He seemed so brutally fair, but not sorry enough to feel anything like disgust for him and a desire to get away from his company as soon as possible. "Yeah, I was thinking that marriage to Kelly would be a formality. She'd have social status. She wouldn't need anything. And with you, you wanted to make me your mistress. I've never met a man like that before. You're just because Rick's father was here. After all, I'm so sorry I let myself get weak and thought it was sincere. So, you know, time is running out." And Jacob got up from his chair. "I think I need to go see Kelly and my granddaughter." Lisa was overwhelmed with emotion. She found the strength to curb them. She realized that right now her best friend was essentially at a crossroads. She could fall back, because even getting her health back would be difficult. Or could she actually take advantage of all that Jacob Smith was offering? She could easily just divorce Charles. And Miranda, the girl, could get a good start in life. So Lisa swore to herself. She kept the dark secret safe. She also believed it was just a gut feeling that Jacob Smith is another complicated and cruel man who lives by his own set of rules. But he wouldn't hurt Kelly and Miranda. Kelly met Jacob. She liked him immediately. Later, she confided in Lisa that it was as if she could sense in him the father figure she never had. Miranda was wary of the serious uncle at first, but then agreed to call him Grandpa. And then, when he gave her a marvelous plush giraffe and a box of chocolate-covered raspberries, she even dared to ask that if she got a grandfather, couldn't her daddy magically appear as well? And Jacob wondered. He could, of course, introduce Kelly to several worthy young men and naturally belong to his circle. But he promised himself to give it some serious thought. Rick, for two reasons. To keep him out of the way and for educational purposes, Jacob had sent him to the other side of the country to deal with a local problem branch of one of the family business branches. Clara took the news about the transfer of her shareholding as Jacob expected. She fought back with all her might, but then resigned herself to the fact that there was no hiding from the family business. However, she had reason to rejoice. The designer to whom she sent a photo of Kelly's dress said that this girl definitely has talent. Kelly was in a pleasant shock from such news. But the idea that maybe she could realize her dream and do what she likes in life was already beckoning, especially since earnings could be taken care of for now. And Jacob assured her that all the business of transferring the Mason property to Miranda had already been started by his lawyers, and naturally everything would be held in trust. And the little girl and her mother, as they call it, could only skim the cream. Lisa was happy with the way things were lining up, and it seemed she had finally gotten off the carousel of caregiving. Albeit the care of her best friend, but it was someone else's life, while her own seemed to be on pause. And now it was time for a change. One evening, Lisa herself called James and told him they needed to meet, despite the increasingly consuming world around them. Fall. The weather was nice, warm. The couple walked slowly down the alley, rustling the leaves. "Do you still want us to get married?" she asked. James stopped, caught her by the shoulders, looked her in the eyes so hard it was clear. "I guess I agree. No offense, but we've been friends for so many years. It's not easy to move on to new ones like this. I'll try. Let's just take it slow. Let's just have a nice romance first. I also want us to learn to understand each other better. Otherwise, it'll be a scandal. Does that suit you?" Maybe not. It was not worth talking about love and the future at all, but Lisa didn't know any other way. James smiled and nodded. "I know I'm not perfect, but I'm glad you're giving me a chance. I'll do whatever it takes to make us happy.